Open the public session then. I'd remind members to turn off their mobile phones and certainly put them into silent mode. We do have quorum. I'm going to call a meeting to order, so I'm going to advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Clerk, are you aware of any apologies? None have been made at this stage. Is anybody attending via Zoom today? No. That's as we know. Okay. Agenda item 2 is the declarations of interest. Members, I would remind you of your responsibility to declare any interests in any of the items under discussion today. Do any members have any interest to declare in relation to any of today's pieces of business? Nope. Thank you, members. Agenda item 3 is Chairperson's business. Item number 1, members, I refer you to page 11 of table papers to the Minister's oral statement that he made to the Assembly on Tuesday relating to wastewater regulation and enforcement. I met formally with the Minister on Tuesday morning before the statement was made. Declan was to attend that, but unfortunately due to a personal matter was unable to be there. So the clerk was with me and we discussed aspects of regulation and enforcement that fall to DAERA in this regard. And I was particularly interested in discussing how low level discharge from septic tanks will be dealt with. We briefly discussed the topics that the statement covered, including fines and penalties, review of sentences as part of the DOJ's review of sentencing, the intent to withdraw from SORPI, and as was recommended by the independent review of environmental governance. Then we discussed protection of Belfast Lough, new standards for discharge consents, etc., and the Minister's view that Northern Ireland requires an independent environmental regulator to bring us in line with the rest of the UK and the Republic of Ireland. So in regard to that, members, have you any comments to make, or are you content to note? All right, members, thank you. Item number 2 of Chairperson's business. I refer you to page 7 of the pack to the request for the Northern Ireland Food Standards Agency to brief the committee on its work in protecting public health. Have you any comments? Are you content to note and add the agency to our list of briefings? Thank you, members. Item number 3. I refer you to page 4 of table papers to the Finance Minister's oral statement that he made to the Assembly on Tuesday relating to the Chancellor's spring forecast. The Minister stated that further to the previously announced £400 million reserve claim this financial year, which is to be paid back over 3 years, the Executive will receive an additional £390 million over the next 3 years, and although welcome, severe pressures on the Executive's finances remain. The Minister also spoke to the Executive working with Treasury through an open book review of departmental spending to be completed by mid-March, with the anticipation this will support the Executive in agreeing a multi-year budget. Any comments, members, or are you content to note? The Minister will be with us today. We can ask where that touches on any bids that he'll be making, I suppose. Item number 4, members, last week we agreed to hold a joint concurrent meeting with the Committee for Infrastructure to take evidence from NI Water and also from the Planning Statutory Consultee Forum, as Gareth brought up with us. To date, on Monday the 20th of April at 10 a.m. The date was proposed 20th of April at 10 a.m. Yesterday, the clerk to the Committee for Infrastructure emailed our clerk to say that the committee has requested a preference for a meeting on a Tuesday due to a party meeting scheduled for Monday morning. So, members, are you content that we seek an alternative date for a Tuesday meeting? However, this does tend to put more pressure on the quorum as plenary commences at 10:30, as you're well aware. So we have to work with them, and I suppose we're kind of in their hands. Members content, we'll look for an alternative date. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 4 is minutes of the meeting on the 26th of February. I refer you to the draft minutes from our meeting on the 26th of February, starting at page 8 of the pack. And have you any comments? Are you content with the minutes as drafted? And if you are, I will sign them and they will be published on the website. Yep, thank you, members. Agenda item 5, matters arising. So, members, I refer you to page 26 of the pack to response from the Department dated the 24th of February regarding RSPB's concerns relating to the draft Nature Recovery Strategy consultation. On the 29th of January, we considered a written briefing on the launch of the consultation and then sought a response from DAERA to correspondence we considered from the RSPB outlining the proposals needed to strengthen. The Department states it will consider RSPB's concerns as part of the consultation process and have requested members' views on it and how it might strengthen the strategy, and particularly the case for setting legally binding nature recovery targets. Officials will also brief the committee once the consultation closes. So, members, have you any comments, or are you content to note until we get a briefing on that consultation? Yep. Thank you, members. Item number 2 then is at page 28 of your pack to response from the Department dated 24th of February regarding the personal data breach in DAERA that occurred while issuing an email to stakeholders on the Just Transition Commission. We first considered the Minister's response to our request for an update on the matter on the 12th of February, and then we agreed to seek clarity on the circumstances of the breach. The response states that the blind carbon copy function was not applied. resulting in the 94 recipients outside of DAERA being able to see other email addresses, but no other personal information was disclosed. 81 recipients were organisations, with the remaining 13 being personal email addresses. The Department also states that to date no costs incurred because of this incident, and the ICO has advised that no further action is necessary, as damage or detriment to data subjects is unlikely to occur following the breach. Members, any comments? Content to note. Thank you, members. Okay, item number 3 then. I refer to page 32 of the pack to the responses dated the 26th of February from the Department regarding blue tongue virus and movements within the temporary control zone. At our meeting on the 5th of February, we agreed to write to the Department to request more information on the criteria, timelines and processes required for lifting of those temporary control zones. In relation to our query on any potential for derogation, the response states that the rules concerning the movement of live animals between NI and the EU member states are set down in EU legislation, and if a derogation was applied, it would be open to imports from all member states, as bilateral agreements are not possible. The impacts and risks of a derogation may bring to the local agri-food industry need careful consideration, and the matter is being kept under constant review by officials. Regarding the criteria, timelines and process for lifting the temporary control zones, the response states that this will be considered based on the available scientific evidence as well as the economic implications. Discussions are ongoing with UFU and Northern Ireland Agricultural Producers Association, otherwise known as NIAPA. In relation to the current temporary control zones, since the 19th of December, all animals, except for animals that have tested positive, can move under general licence within and out of the temporary control zone unless they are in certain high-risk categories. Detailed guidance has been issued to stakeholders and is available on the DAERA website. Have you any comments, or are you content to note? Members. Okay, item number 4, referred to page 36 of the pack to the response dated the 26th of February from the Department regarding new rules for selling and supplying puppies and kittens in Northern Ireland. Members, you will recall on the 12th of February we considered the matter and wrote to the Department requesting a timeline for introducing legislation to create the registration scheme and whether the Department had considered a central DAERA registration scheme. The response states that councils are considered best placed to adapt their existing IT systems to support the scheme, as they will be responsible for establishing and maintaining the required registers. Councils currently hold the information which the scheme will use, and a central register would still require councils to supply and validate the information. The Department also states that it is aware of the resource pressure facing councils, and once the consultation response and way forward is published, it will set up an implementation group with councils, which sounds very familiar. Have you any comments you content to note? Thanks, members. Item number 5, we refer to page 40 of the pack to a response dated the 26th of February from the Department regarding imposition of reciprocal tariffs by the United States of America. We considered the matter on the 12th of February and requested clarification on the Northern Ireland's Bureau's role in promoting Northern Ireland goods in the United States, and if the Department has undertaken a risk assessment on farm businesses on the potential impact of declining exports. The response states that currently, as a result of the US-UK prosperity deal, the US are charging a tariff rate of 10% on most UK agri-food goods, in addition to the most favoured nation tariff rate, and a range of agri-food products, including beef, are actually exempt from the US reciprocal tariff. The Northern Ireland Bureau works closely with InvestNI, local councils and international partners to support trade and investment, facilitate trade missions and delegation visits. It also supports the promotion of NI companies and connects them with US buyers and partners. The Department's view is that the potential impact of declining exports to the US is likely to have minimal impact on farm businesses, given the level of agri-food export trade to the US being relatively small. Regarding actions taken to safeguard and promote Northern Ireland products and combat the risk of low-quality imports, the response highlights that all imports must comply with the relevant regulations. In addition, financial support in raising the profile of Northern Ireland quality regional food is given through the Northern Ireland Regional Food Programme. Have you any comments? Are you content to note? One of the things that just occurs to me is that the role of the Bureau primarily is to promote an increased trade, not just to mitigate against a decline due to trade tariffs. I'm just thinking, is there maybe something we can do, maybe just, and it's not to give them more work, but to maybe seek a response from the Bureau in terms of opportunities for an increase, despite the looming nature of the tariffs and the rapidly changing scene in regard to that, just to get an up-to-date picture of opportunities for greater export. Is that okay, members? You content to do that? So rather than just keeping my eye on the potential for decline, that we're looking at opportunities for growth. Yep, you happy enough with that, Clerk? Is that okay? Thank you. Members, item number 6, refer to page 44 of the pack to response dated the 26th of February from the Department regarding the NIEA review of odour management. At our meeting on the 12th of February, we agreed to request further information regarding the rationale behind its decision not to adopt the updated Environment Agency H4 guidance. The Department states that the updated guidance no longer includes the use of odour modelling or the FIDAL methodology, which is the raised paper dated on the 5th of September that we concluded remains the best practice for assessing odour impacts. Officials also believe that changes will make it more difficult to take effective enforcement action against operators. A project has begun to produce updated NIEA odour guidance by reviewing other odour guidance available, including the Scottish Environment Protection Agency and the Irish Environmental Protection Agency, who also do not intend to adopt the new EA odour guidance. So in the meantime, NIEA will continue to use the previous version of the H4 odour management guidance as well as the 2012 NIEA guidance. If any members have any comments they want to make, are you content to note? Thank you, members.
Chair, sorry.
Sorry, Jim.
I don't know whether or not colleagues will want to do this at this stage or give it further consideration. I'm happy either way. But I'm mindful that there's another piece of correspondence that doesn't mention the environmental shared services at all. And I'm keen now to know, can we try to find out if there's any records or trajectory in relation to how complaint follow-up and outcomes, whether that's notices for betterment or prosecution or whatever it might be, have increased or decreased in the last 5 years. But I think maybe we need to look at that at some point at least.
Do you want to direct anything to SES at this stage, John, in that regard, or?
It might be worth teasing out if they have noticed any impact by this variation of guidelines being used, for example. Sure. But also I'm keen to know the proportionate change in outcomes that there may have been. I mean, there may not be any. Yeah. But I have found it difficult at constituency level in recent times to secure outcomes on these matters, and I'm concerned that there might be a decline in satisfactory outcomes. I
agree, and I think we don't have the time in this mandate to look at this, but I'm intrigued by SES at the moment in terms of their purpose, what their output is, and at a conversation in a piece of constituency work this week with a senior official, not connected to one of the council areas, who didn't seem to be able to give me any detailed response in regard to SES at all. I'm not going to unfairly critique them, but I certainly would like to know more about what they're doing. But Clerk, are you uniform on that in terms of some correspondence to SES on John's points? Anybody any other issues they want to raise in regard to that, rather than doing multiple ones at this stage?
But Chair, it's a bit concerning that NIEA has a concern with regard to the new the guidance that has been reached, that they say is no longer includes the use of odour modelling, which is frequently relied on by NIEA, and that is a problem, because I know from our own constituency there are areas where there is an odour problem, and therefore you depend on NIEA to step in to look at that and to assess that, and one thing and all. And of course, if they're dependent on the other guidance and it's not there, then it's going to create a huge problem. And really, where will we be going with this particular issue?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I suppose what they're suggesting is that the new guidance would make us worse off, is their assessment at this point. We're not happy with where we are with the current guidance either. So, I mean, it is something that the committee has chased around a little bit, Clark, too. So, do we want to find out then from well, obviously they've said they're going to look at the Scottish, the Irish are not moving into that space.
They're not, Chair, it seems to be from the letter that they indicate that they're not going to use the new UK guidance, and they're going to stick with what we have at present until they've completed their own review.
And it leads us back exactly where we were, I suppose. There didn't seem to be obviously, when we look at the sniff test and things like that, there's not a lot of science behind it. Some of it, people are evidently looking at it, but it doesn't seem to be moving forward at any pace at all. Yeah. So, is there anything off that, Tom, is it a watching brief really with regard to NIEA on this matter then, as they develop alternative policy arrangements then? I think it's a live issue for us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gareth?
Yeah, it's just on, where it says it no longer includes the use of odour modelling from EA's perspective, and that's frequently relied on by NIEA to assess the acceptability of odour impacts. To my knowledge from planning, that's also, do they not use that as well for applications, you know, what the possible outputs smell-wise would be for a specific, you know, planning application or project in the countryside, and if that, you know, is there implications for that going forward in terms of how they use their guidance at the minute, and if that guidance was changed, does it look like what the EA is proposing is more reactive to whatever's in place then, you know, apply rather than front load it with here's what you can't produce or here's what isn't acceptable, tailor your project to suit that, rather than like opening the gate and going, well, here's what you're going to have to comply with if you build this. And I think, is that where they're saying it's harder to regulate after the horse is bolted to them?
The environmental
Yeah.
you know, about why they've made those changes to the guidance if
Yeah.
they want to.
Well, there's two things we could do here then. As the clerk rightly pointed out, we could contact the Environment Agency UKA in regard to the direct implication of what they anticipate the direct implications are, particularly around planning, I suppose.
I know consultants do like air modelling and all
Yeah.
this sort of crack, so is that, you know, is that interfering with that in some way?
And then vis-a-vis NIEA's more detailed assessment of that. I mean, they obviously have experts working on this, and they're aware that we're alert to the issue because we obviously receive a substantial amount of correspondence, particularly in regard to nuisance, loss of amenity. Yeah, you happy enough with that, clerk? Too? So, yeah. You content that we write to the Environment Agency? And,
Yeah.
Okay. All right, members, thank you. Okay, members, then number 7 of matters arising then is on page 49 of your pack. It was a response dated on the 26th of February from the Chief Minister of the Isle of Man Government to our letter highlighting our concerns regarding the new work visa requirements. The response states that they are aware of the situation and the concerns of the Isle of Man Treasury, which holds responsibility for immigration matters, will engage with DAERA to explore practical solutions. So thank the members for their engagement in that. Are there any other comments on that, Michelle?
Yeah, obviously the most practical solution that they could come up with is actually to exempt Northern Ireland boats from the policy, but I think we'll maybe follow that up with the Minister whenever he comes later.
Yeah, no problem. That's absolutely grand. Yeah, good point. Okay, members, number 8 then referred to page 52 of the pack to the correspondence dated 26th of February with updated information on this matter from the Department regarding the Assembly debate of the draft greenhouse gas emissions trading scheme amendment extension to maritime activities order 2026 scheduled for next Tuesday the 10th of March. The Department states the draft order has already been affirmed by the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senate and the House of Commons, and it is intended to be tabled for making as an order in Council on the 1st of April. As the Department's letter states, the House of Lords debate was originally scheduled for the 3rd of March, but in an update to that, a motion to decline to approve the draft order has now been listed for the 12th of March. Members will recall that a query was raised during the briefing on the 19th of February regarding ongoing business uncertainty due to the current EU's emissions scheme review and negotiations with the UK and a potential linkage of schemes. The Department has now confirmed that these negotiations have commenced and states that inclusion of maritime emissions in the UK ETS is essential for linking of the schemes and will facilitate an exemption from the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, otherwise known as CBAM, so removing a major barrier to trade and lower costs for UK businesses. The Department also states that UK exports of goods in scope with EU CBAM are worth almost £7 billion, and without an exemption, businesses could face large admin and direct costs. So, members, have you any comments? We will, of course, be discussing the matter further at our next item, when we'll be briefed by representatives from Stena Line and the UK Chamber of Shipping. Yep, happy enough to take it in there. All right, okay, members. Then agenda item 6 is the oral evidence session briefing from Stena Line and the UK Chamber of Shipping, Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment Extension to Maritime Activities Order 2026. So, members, as you are aware, the UK ETS Authority has laid the SI under draft affirmative resolution to expand the scope of the scheme to include the domestic maritime sector. The Assembly debate is scheduled for next Tuesday, the 10th of March. Members are also aware that we received correspondence from Stena Line and the UK Chamber of Shipping outlining their concerns regarding the impact that this proposed SI will have on Northern Ireland. Members, the correspondence from Confluence Consulting on behalf of Stena Line can be found at page 57 and correspondence from the UK Chamber of Shipping at page 61. In addition, I refer you to page 22 of tabled papers to correspondence from Logistics UK dated the 3rd of March, also setting out its concerns regarding the potential detrimental effects and implications for Northern Ireland supply chains and economy. So I refer you to the pack, to a copy of the draft SI, which starts at page 66, and a copy of the explanatory memorandum, which starts at page 130. We were to be briefed by officials on the 19th of February and then agreed to invite Stena Line. We were briefed by officials on the 19th and we then agreed to invite Stena Line and the UK Chamber of Shipping to hear from them firsthand. So now I'm going to welcome Mr Paul Grant, Trade Director of RHC North, Stena Line, and Ms Katrina Ross, Policy Director, Commercial and Governance, UK Chamber of Shipping. So if you would have a brief for the committee, we'd be more than happy to pin our ears back and listen, and then hopefully you'll be able to take a few questions from us. Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to give evidence today. We want to begin by welcoming the rigour in which this committee has approached its scrutiny. The UK Chamber of Shipping and our members are proud to have led the way on decarbonisation, publicly calling for the global shipping industry to reach net zero emissions by 2050 prior to the UK government and IMO commitments. Across our sectors, we have already invested in new technologies and pioneering innovations such as new hybrid vessels that will increase freight capacity in Northern Ireland by 40% whilst reducing energy usage by 20% as a result of Stena Line's investments, as well as additional investments to enable shore power connections to meet the industry's commitments and lead the way to the drive towards net zero. However, the current UK ETS proposals risks raising costs for passengers and communities, diverting capital away from decarbonisation and harming Northern Ireland's competitiveness before essential infrastructure is in place. In addition, these proposals are being rushed through with both insufficient evidence and insufficient time for operators to comply, further increasing compound cost burdens for operators and businesses within the Northern Irish supply chain. Firstly, the evidence gap. In your previous session, officials themselves were clear that there are evidence gaps in quantifying Northern Ireland-specific impacts, and the precise consumer modelling is challenging. That is an important admission. If analysis gaps exist, particularly in a structurally distinct region, it is reasonable to ask whether proceeding with current policy at the current pace and to the extent proposed is fair, workable and proportionate. Northern Ireland is structurally dependent on ferries for travel and freight for food, medicines, materials and everyday goods. These are essential public interest routes, not purely discretionary commercial operations. Stena Line's own estimates, of which I'm sure you'll hear more details, show freight rate increases of around 6% as a result of these measures, expected to exceed £9 million annually based on the 50% ETS allowances that they will be liable for. Our experience from the EU ETS suggests fuel cost increases in the region of 25 to 30% and fare rises of up to 15%, with a potential for similar outcomes for Northern Irish routes. Higher transport costs are likely to increase the price of travel and everyday items such as food, fuel, essential goods, materials and retail products, all of which heavily rely on Northern Irish to Great Britain ferry supply chains. The exemption granted to Scottish island communities demonstrates that the UK government already recognises that some domestic routes face disproportionate impacts. Similar consideration may be appropriate for Northern Ireland, given its constitutional and economic circumstances. Indeed, the domestic impact assessment does not duly assess or quantify the potential for unequal and disproportionate impacts on communities based in all of the specific geographic regions that are more dependent on maritime links than others based in the mainland of Great Britain. This policy also does not operate in isolation. Operators are already absorbing fuel volatility, high insurance and employment costs, alongside broader inflationary and recent geopolitical pressures. Introducing new monitoring requirements alongside being liable for those emissions from 2026 and financial surrender obligations from 2028 add further administrative burden, compliance exposure and working capital costs. These all compound. At the same time, vessels cannot yet access alternative fuels, onshore power or adequate grid capacity to reduce emissions at berth, none of which exist at scale in UK ports today. The industry has already invested in technology to support this. For example, by 2028, 80% of the global cruise ship fleet will be shore power capable, and 1/3 of these vessels will call in the UK, including over 150 calls in Belfast, contributing an estimated £25 million to the local and wider tourism economy. However, as outlined last week, Belfast Port does not anticipate having shore power capacity of any kind until at least 2035. Without this infrastructure, the UK ETS, as proposed, risks deterring maritime business and investment without delivering decarbonisation. The stated aim of the extension to maritime, as set out by the UK government, is to drive and incentivise emissions reductions. However, unlike the EU, which has pledged to ring-fence revenues from the EU ETS for targeted maritime decarbonisation projects, the UK has yet to outline such a policy commitment, meaning these revenues are not guaranteed to be invested in decarbonisation projects or even in Northern Ireland. Without an unequivocal commitment to recycle revenues from maritime under the UK ETS into much needed and vital infrastructure such as shore power, alternative fuels, vessel retrofits and hybrid electric ferries, the UK ETS will divert capital away from green investment, including hybrid and electric vessels, thereby acting as a carbon tax and not a decarbonisation lever. The industry firmly believes that a global regulatory framework is the best route to reducing global shipping emissions. However, in the absence of a global measure, the negotiations of the UK-EU linkage remain ongoing, leaving further uncertainty for the industry about the goalposts for aligning the schemes. Given that Northern Ireland sits at the intersection of two regulatory environments and that maritime transport is central to Northern Ireland's economic and social connectivity, these ongoing discussions are particularly essential. The UK Chamber, in the absence of a global regulatory framework, strongly supports the UK and EU ETS linkage, but believes that the current UK statutory instrument risks undermining that goal in key areas, such as enforcement and data quality, as well as the proposed entry into force and the surrender of allowances timelines. These concerns risk creating an unlevel playing field for operators with impacts on consumers in Northern Ireland, as well as customers, as well as higher administrative burdens and market distortion. Further, the EU has the Fuel EU Maritime Scheme. Establishing a workable and interoperable fuel standard for shipping will be crucial for the UK and Northern Ireland to decarbonise. We understand that the UK government is likely to consult on a maritime fuel standard as stated in the UK's Maritime Decarbonisation Strategy, which, again, only adds uncertainty and, from an industry perspective, reinforces the desire to wait for the fuel standards outcome before pushing ahead with the ETS on the current timetable. We have consistently called for a pragmatic approach that supports Northern Ireland's economy while helping to ensure a successful UK-EU linkage, ETS linkage. We call for the design of the UK Monitoring, Reporting and Verification Scheme, MRV, and the UK ETS mechanisms to be aligned with the EU MRV and EU ETS design, such as timelines, enforcement mechanisms, and data systems to avoid divergence that could hinder linkage. We recommend a phased implementation for MRV data reporting, like the EU did, and the UK already has done for its waste incineration industry, as well as mirroring the EU's phasing in of allowances to surrender, which starts at a 40% obligation the first year, 70% in the second year, and ramps up to 100% in year 3. We also call for a reassessment of impacts on Northern Irish and Great British lifeline routes, and for the UK government to carefully consider targeted mitigations for the Northern Irish community, given that one type of mitigation has been granted to the Scottish Island communities. The UK government also needs to provide technical guidance and final regulatory text urgently, giving industry sufficient time to prepare systems and contracts. Northern Ireland has more at stake than most parts of the UK in the design of the UK ETS maritime rules due to its reliance on maritime transport, the operation of the Windsor framework, and the closer economic integration with both Great Britain and Ireland as a member of the EU. We are not asking for any retreat from ambition, and as I said from the outset, we fully support decarbonisation. What our members, including those operating in Northern Ireland, are asking for is the right sequencing that ensures that the policy is workable in practice, proportionate to the evidence currently available, and fair to the communities and businesses living and operating in Northern Ireland. The Chamber stands ready to work constructively with the UK and Northern Irish authorities to ensure the scheme is both environmentally effective and economically fair, supporting decarbonisation while protecting Northern Irish vital connectivity and competitiveness. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to brief the committee today. Stena Line has operated from Northern Ireland for 4 decades, and recently we celebrated 30 years in Belfast. Stena Line is the largest ferry operator on the Irish Sea, and Belfast is our largest base across the entire Stena Line network. We have 7 ships operating from Belfast today, including 4 brand new ships introduced since 2020. Stena Line operate 3 key routes from Belfast, sailing to Cairnryan, Hisham and Birkenhead, with up to 22 sailings daily, operating 364 days per year. We carry 600,000 freight units, 500,000 tourist cars and 1.7 million people between Britain and Belfast. For Northern Ireland, ferry services are not optional transport links. They are essential economic infrastructure. The routes provided by Stena Line underpin agri-food exports, time-sensitive chilled supply lines, advanced manufacturing, just-in-time components, retail distribution networks, supplying supermarkets and high streets, construction materials, heavy freight, tourism and visitor flows, movements essential to healthcare and other public services. In effect, these routes function as economic arteries for Northern Ireland. Importantly, Stena Line is not simply a service provider using Northern Ireland as a transit point. We are a long-term investor supporting hundreds of direct jobs in Belfast across port operations, crewing, engineering, logistics and administration, as well as 1,000 more in the manufacturing, agri-foods, retail and logistics sectors. In recent years, we have invested over £500 million in our fleet, ports and those services serving Northern Ireland. This includes over £100 million invested in 2 brand new hybrid freight ferries, Stena Connecta and Stena Futura, for the Belfast to Hisham route, launched during autumn 2025. These vessels are equipped for methanol fuel, battery propulsion, shore power connectivity, and where and when infrastructure exists. These investments demonstrate a long-term commitment to maintaining and modernising Northern Ireland's maritime connectivity. I also want to stress that Stena Line supports decarbonisation and is actively investing in fleet modernisation, hybrid propulsion and alternative fuels, as demonstrated by Stena Futura and Stena Connecta. We recognise that maritime transport must play its part in achieving net zero, and Stena Line aims to reduce its own CO2 emissions by 30% by 2030. However, decarbonisation policy should be aligned with technological and infrastructure readiness. Presently, alternative fuels remain limited in supply and significantly more expensive than conventional marine fuels. Biomethanol is almost 4 times the price of current very low sulphur fuel or marine gas oil used today. Shore power infrastructure is largely unavailable across UK ports, including those serving Northern Ireland. There is no dedicated revenue recycling mechanism to reinvest the UK ETS proceeds into maritime transition. In these circumstances, the proposed scheme risks functioning primarily as a tax rather than a practical decarbonisation incentive in the short term. If the purpose of UK ETS is to stimulate decarbonisation, there must be mechanisms in the system to facilitate that. If not, this is just a tax on trade. The impact of rising costs will have a disproportionate impact on Northern Ireland because we are so uniquely dependent on maritime transport. Approximately 90% of goods entering or leaving Northern Ireland move by sea. There is no fixed link to Great Britain and no viable alternative to maritime freight for the scale and nature of the trade involved. For most regions in Great Britain, maritime transport is one option among several. For many businesses in Northern Ireland, it is the only route to our principal market. That structural reality means that any increase in maritime operating costs has economic-wide implications for Northern Ireland that are materially different from those felt elsewhere in the UK. In practical terms, increased compliance will raise export costs for Northern Ireland producers. Our shadow calculations are indicating the impact to be an extra £1.10 per metre on freight shipments. That's £15 per trailer moving back and forth, or an extra 6% on the average cost, which will be applied from the 1st of July 2026. Please remember, this is a variable and this cost can move. It can move upwards as well. They will increase input costs for manufacturers and agri-food businesses. They will hit retailers, SMEs, and ultimately affect household prices and the cost of living. Northern Ireland businesses compete daily with firms located in Great Britain. Those competitors in GB do not face the unavoidable sea transportation costs when trading within their domestic market. Even with the 50% allowance surrender reduction for NIGB routes, a significant structural cost differential remains. That differential risks increasing the relative cost base for Northern Ireland producers compared to their GB-based competitors and impacting competitiveness. While the 50% reduction is welcome, it does not eliminate the imbalance created by our geography. There is legitimate argument that Northern Ireland's reliance on maritime connectivity is comparable in structural terms to that of island communities in Scotland, where exemptions recognise the absence of alternatives. In closing, given Northern Ireland's unique exposure, a proportionate approach is necessary. At minimum, this should include a 12-month implementation delay for all ferries in regular traffic between Northern Ireland and GB to allow proper preparation and the dedicated Northern Ireland Economic Impact Assessment. A phased introduction like EU ETS. They had a 3-year phased-in model to avoid the sudden cost shocks that would hit the market. And to reiterate, if the purpose of UK ETS is to stimulate decarbonisation, there has to be mechanisms in the system to stimulate. Otherwise, this is just a tax on trade. There needs to be a clear commitment to ring-fence ETS revenues, again like the EU ETS, into maritime decarbonisation, including port and shore power infrastructure in Northern Ireland. Such measures would not weaken decarbonisation ambitions. They would ensure that the policy designs reflect economic realities and avoids unintended consequences. Thank you once again for your time this morning and listening to our concerns.
Thank you so much, and thank you for so eloquently stating the case, but also for reiterating your ambition to contribute to the decarbonisation intergovernmental ambition. I'm going to be honest, I agree with you insofar as I don't think we're particularly well suited at the moment and in many contexts to look at this as at any other aspect than a tax. You have demonstrated in some ways some of the steps that the maritime community have taken to decarbonisation. So there's in the paper it talks about new freight vessels and the ability to run on alternative fuels. But we're also hampered here in Northern Ireland because there's no onshore power facility for the ships when they dock. In regard to that passing on of cost, what do you think would be the implication then for the Northern Ireland consumer or the business who's trying to export? And would there be a knock-on cost in terms of their competitiveness, given that GB is evidently the biggest market for our exporters?
Absolutely. I mean, as we have stated, this will increase the cost per freight unit that moves across between Belfast and the GB. We've already published our shadow prices. They will increase by at least £15. And remember, that £15 is variable. That can increase. And, that's a large charge for most hauliers. It's a 6% increase, at least, on their shipping costs. And, the logistics and the transport industry, and ferry operators, we operate on low margins. So these costs will be passed ultimately to the hauliers and to their customers and ultimately to consumers in Northern Ireland.
And in terms of the revenue that potentially would be raised by this, then, and there is absolutely no indication from London, for instance, that is being used in terms of retrofitting or incentivising decarbonisation?
Not directly, no. I think we've been told repeatedly that there is no scope for hypothecation in the way that the EU ETS has been provided.
And that is very useful because it brings me on to the fact that this doesn't mirror EU implementation at all, because it's very clear through a number of things that have been set out in the paper that there is there is something that could be copied. Yeah. Would you guys be in favour of mirroring the EU scheme then, if the UK government were to pick that up? Is there enough in that? But accepting the fact that you've set out very clearly that Northern Ireland is a very specific player here, given that 90% of our movements are via our ships.
So in the absence of a global regulatory framework, we are in favour of linking via alignment for UK and EU ETS. What our main concern about this domestic statutory instrument is that it doesn't mirror the EU ETS, and if the linkage were to be successful, and we hope it is successful, operators will have to change their systems again. So if you really feel that, if it's felt that there is a great chance of success of our systems being linked, why don't you do this all in one shot so that you minimise the administrative burden on ship operators, both domestically and internationally?
Okay. My final one for me before I let members in, there's plenty of interest in this. In regard to, are you aware of the department here of having made a specific case for Northern Ireland, and in particular the import and export of goods in regard to the unique position that we occupy?
Not aware.
No.
We, if that is alluding to CBAM, the only thing we were provided was about a very short paragraph about that impact. But we are, A, it's not directly relevant to this statutory instrument, and B, I think that has wider implications, because for us, we don't think it's an either or. All of these costs will compound for both ETS and I think what you're referring to is maybe CBAM.
Yes, could you expand on that a little bit? Because I think from the departmental piece that we've been given, it's been alluded to that if we didn't accept this, things could be worse.
Yeah, so my understanding, bear with me because we're not sort of directly impacted by this, is that the EU's carbon trade import tax, that's what CBAM is, doesn't currently apply to Northern Ireland because of the protections put in for the Windsor Framework. However, the UK government is planning, through its draft legislation, to apply its own carbon trade import tax to the whole of Great Britain and Northern Ireland from the 1st of January 2027. So this is a UK-led policy, given that that barrier has not been yet imposed on the EU side. Whatever happens is not an either-or. If you're not successful in linking the schemes, there will be costs imposed on any transfers of specific products, such as fertilisers, from Northern Ireland to Ireland and any other EU member state, and to countries like the United States, which manufactures fertilisers. If you do agree to link, there'll be two impacts. One is potentially, if Northern Ireland has to take 100% of the ETS allowances as part of that agreement, that's one extra cost. The second cost is, yes, maybe imports of fertilisers from Europe may be exempt, but the UK government will be imposing a cost on importing fertilisers from producer states, such as the United States. Compound with the current geopolitical war that's going on, and really the inputs to those fertiliser production are being severely hampered, with, I think, news in the Today, in the Financial Times and Guardian really raising the alarm for farmers on the impacts of, importing fertilisers because it'd be more expensive to produce them. The costs just layer and layer and layer, whatever happens.
Yeah, it's adding to the complexity that our businesses here in terms of export have to facilitate just with the Windsor Framework, and this is an additional level to that of complexity. And I would go as far as to say unnecessary, given the fact that it can't be clearly linked to a decarbonisation agenda. It seems to me that the government have set this up like a draconian tax, but I'm going to bring members in at this stage, if that's okay. Declan?
No, just move on.
No, you're happy enough? Okay, Michelle?
Thank you, and thank you very much for your very detailed presentation. There seems to be a difference in emphasis in relation to the economic impact that this will have on Northern Ireland. Certainly when this was raised with officials a couple of weeks ago, I think they seem to downplay what those costs would be, and obviously then the impact then on the consumer. I suppose the question that I am going to ask is, are you aware of a robust economic impact assessment being carried out on the GB-NI route specifically?
Can I answer that question?
Of course.
Absolutely. There hasn't been a economic impact assessment on the impacts of this. I think there was some work alluded to by Frontier Economics, but that related to carbon leakage. It wasn't about the economic impact of what these additional charges would have on Northern Ireland businesses or the Northern Ireland consumer. So I think that's a vital piece of information that's actually missing to take these decisions.
I have been contacted by a number of hauliers who are obviously quite distressed about this, and what the potential impact will be on their businesses, given the fact that they work on incredibly narrow margins. So I'm interested to hear your response in relation to that. You also mentioned the fact that this was being rushed through. You've obviously asked for a 12-month delay in implementation. What difference will it make for us if we were to pray against this?
I think the just going back to your first question is the fact that you would have a proper economic assessment and would be able to kind of be better informed about how it is going to affect Northern Ireland, because there's no doubt about it that the hauliers are concerned about it, and I'm sure other sectors in the business community will be concerned about increased costs and reducing competitiveness.
Can I also add, we think that this SI actually undermines linkage because, for example, the way that enforcement works, it's completely not comparable. So say if you would take to the geography of Ireland and Northern Ireland together, if a ship that has no UK footprint and then calls at a port of Dublin, the EU has the right to arrest, Irish maritime authorities have the right to arrest that ship if there are any discrepancies in the data submissions under its sort of document of compliance. The UK does not have that mechanism. So if that same ship goes to a Belfast port, if it doesn't have a corporate presence in the UK, we are really unsure how the UK Maritime Authority is able to arrest the ship in the same way as the EU can. So I don't understand how, if you're talking about level playing field or market distortion, if you don't have the same enforcement powers, how is it possible for this to link?
Just one final question, because all politics is local, and I represent the Strangford constituency, and we do have the Strangford ferry, and I understand that the proposals currently would mean that the ferry wouldn't be included and isn't caught in this regulation, but there may be a review which could subsequently include it. My concern in relation to that would be the number of people that use the ferry on a daily basis, and it's an essential lifeline for them for going to work, going to school, etc., going to hospitals as well. Could I maybe ask you about the implications of that and what that may look like?
Of course. So our understanding from previous consultation responses is that the government intends to review the regime in 2028 to consider increasing the scope of the ETS to basically lower the size threshold from 5,000 gross tonnes to 400 gross tonnes. If any of those ships are above 400 gross tonnes, they would be caught in that review. Now, the good thing about linking with the EU, and this is a choice that the UK government has to make, is that the EU actually allows for temporary derogations for lifeline community services for passenger ships. We have consistently called for the UK government to use those derogations within its implementation of UK ETS, but it's only decided for now to implement that for Scottish ferries. It has excluded Isle of Wight in that. So the Isle of Wight, for example, there are 3 operators. This rule has already distorted that market. Of the two of the operators aren't caught by it because the vessels are below the threshold of 5,000 gross tonnes. And the third operator, 2 out of his 11 vessels will be caught by these rules, 100% cost to the Isle of Wight communities. And ironically, the vessel that will be caught is the newest investment with hybrid technology. So we have been consistently asking the UK government to put proper impact assessments for all the geographies that are reliant on maritime links. We do not think that assessment has been done adequately, and they have not used the power from the EU to allow these derogations for these lifeline communities.
Thank you very much.
Michelle. John, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your presentation. Can I ask you, you've touched on some of this already, and I know that this could be a very detailed response, so a summary would suffice. Your own lobbying to and with the UK government, either directly yourselves or through your UK-wide representative bodies, how successful has that been, and is there a summary update on how they might have responded to the mitigations you mentioned that were specific to Northern Ireland, including the 12-month delay?
I'll go first. This consultation came out in 2022. We duly responded to it, and we have had, some meetings with the various departmental officials. However, it's been very difficult to get a genuine conversation back and forth because of perceived market sensitivities when discussing emissions trading scheme, which, for example, in the EU, they don't seem to have that trouble because they've got various open working groups to discuss the implementation of ETS on maritime. And so, yes, the process has been there, but the actual kind of answers to these impacts were not released to us until they produced the domestic impact assessment alongside this SI. And when we looked at that SI, it was incredibly revealing in terms of the government's perceptions of what the impacts would be. So apparently Scotland deserved an exemption, but the Isle of Wight didn't deserve one, even though they've got very similar dynamics. And the logic of the reasoning didn't really make much sense to us as well. And we've been really trying to engage and be really constructive and say there are EU mechanisms for this. Why are you not doing similar things? And there's not been that to and from.
Okay. This one's probably a slightly more delicate issue, and I hope you understand my rationale for asking it. And I ask it notwithstanding the very significant contribution to the economy that the businesses represented make for us all. But the reality is that the turnover of some operators is counted in billions, as is the profit, according to 2024 figures that I looked at, and I'm assuming that pattern has been consistent for a number of years. Therefore, can I ask, given that there was the consultation in 2022 that you mentioned, and then a more detailed consultation in November 2024, which gave, as far as I understand it, more information about the proposed technical design of the scheme, has your own investment in decarbonisation increased over the years, and specifically increased since those consultations took place?
Well, I can answer that question, and I think I referenced it. The two brand new ferries that we've just invested in both cost £100 million, and we have put in systems and propulsion mechanisms and so forth in those ferries that are ready for methanol fuel, are ready for plug-in electricity. And in fact, on one of our ferries we've got a unique thing in terms of a rotor sail that tries to reduce the fuel consumption on the ship, and that is something that we have brought as a first to the REC. So Stena Line have invested many millions of pounds in decarbonisation. And when you mention large turnovers, yes, there are large turnovers, but I can tell you the profitability doesn't match the turnover. And we are a very low margin business, a high cost business and a low margin business, like everyone in the transport sector.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. John, Aoife?
Thank you very much for your oral briefing today. So just in terms of EU aligning, right, so the EU have already extended its emissions trading scheme to maritime transport. From an operator's perspective, do you see benefits in the north aligning with that system, particularly given the number of routes that operate between ports in the north and EU ports?
So again, I think the context of this is, I would say, it was the actual kind of global rules that have been driving a lot of the investments into decarbonisation rather than the UK ETS per se, because, for example, Stena ships actually can be traded in and out of international routes. They're not purely domestic. Yes, NI is a domestic route. The investment, they need to make that investment so that they can deploy that ship in international routes. Having said that, I think in the absence of a global regulatory regime, there would be benefits to linkage as long as it's phased in and the costs are smoothed out over a period of years, and that should be allowed, because again, on the EU side, because they phased it as 40%, 70%, 100%, that smoothed it out, and I think it's only this year that they're facing 100%. I think in principle it's good, but actually the implementation needs to be phased in for the benefit of the community.
Okay. Okay.
May I just come in
Yeah,
on that
of
as well?
course, yeah.
I think there's another key point. I mean, yes, we have EU ETS and it applies across other parts of the Stena group, obviously, but I think from our perspective there is a significant flaw in the fact that it is still a tax. There's still nothing there that actually encourages or incentivizes us in terms of the provision of the relevant fuels that will help with carbonisation, and also as well with the infrastructure around ports for plug-in electricity. Yes, it is easier if it's aligned with the EU in some respects, but I think the very nature of ETS is the fact that it is a charge that's applied on consumers before the infrastructure is in place.
And just if my reading, when I'm wondering if my reading is correct, so if they aren't aligned, am I right in saying that it is likely that they will be hit by CBAM?
I can take that. So I
Yeah.
think in any case they will be hit by some sort of CBAM.
Okay.
It's the extent of the CBAM and where those lines are drawn. If there's no linkage, it will be drawn, I think, between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Yeah.
If there is Northern Ireland and the rest of the world, so US imports of fertilisers, if you have a linkage, you'll still be hit by imports you'll be hit by imports from the US for fertiliser, but B, then Northern Ireland may be subject to 100% of emissions for ETS. So those costs, however they're formulated, will still stack up.
Okay. And just in terms of a transition, a timeline, so in terms of transition to lower emission ferry services, what would you see as a realistic timeline for the sector to move significantly away from traditional fuels?
I think that very much depends on the supply of methanol or alternative fuels and the economic viability in operating with those fuels, because as I think I mentioned, those fuels are currently 4 times more expensive than the fuel that we use today. And also as well, we don't have the opportunity to plug in for the electricity. And I think those are 2 very fundamental factors that need to be considered in a decarbonisation journey. We are doing everything as operators in our part to make sure that our ships are as fuel and energy efficient as they can possibly be, and we're getting ourselves ready in terms of investing many millions of pounds in terms of having ships ready in advance of the infrastructure being ready.
Thank you.
Just before I bring anybody else in, I'll jump on the top of the fuel one at the moment because it's very pertinent given the geopolitical state and the state of play in the Middle East and the discussions locally about price of diesel, petrol, oil and so on. And I imagine that you guys are going to be impacted by that as well, given the fact that you haven't been able to move on methanol. Have you anything in that space that you want to raise? And then could you give us a wee bit more detail around methanol and how sustainable that is and that biofuels?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the fuel is a massive cost for anybody in the transportation industry. And we have a mechanism, particularly when it comes to freight operators, whereby we've got a BAF mechanism where the prices fluctuate depending on how the fuel moves. In recent periods, it has been a reduction because oil prices have been low, but subsequently as oil prices increase, those costs will be borne by hauliers. And a lot of the costs we will have to absorb in our business as well. In terms of methanol, we have made ourselves ready for methanol, but the big problem with methanol is just there is not sufficient supply and there isn't infrastructure in place to make sure that we've got sufficient supply to operate on our 7 ferries.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. Thanks, members, for allowing me to jump in there. Daniel, you're up next, buddy.
Yeah, thank you both for the presentation. A number of the questions have already been touched on, but both of you have said that the policy risks acting more like a carbon tax than a decarbonisation mechanism because of the required alternatives such as shore power, low carbon fuels, which are not available. So from your perspective, what infrastructure technology would need to be in place before the scheme could genuinely drive emission reductions?
I think for the industry, the points that we've kind of mentioned need to really be in place. There needs to be supply of alternative fuels or incentives in terms of the current prices of those alternative fuels. Plus also we need to have the ability to plug in on our ships at different ports. But I mean, as far as I'm aware, that seems to be many, many years away. And it's not just Belfast. I mean, we have to think about places like Cairnryan, we have to think about Heysham, and we have to think about Birkenhead, 3 of the places that we serve, and people go back and forth between Northern Ireland and GB.
I'll also add that, for example, I think the government's been working with the aviation industry to create a revenue mechanism for sustainable aviation fuels. There's nothing in train for an equivalent for maritime. So if there's nothing in place to set up a coalition for offtake agreements, that needs a little bit of de-risking from government to work together on key ports that need it. We've just not seen the policy development on that at sufficient pace compared to the developments on ETS as a regulatory stick, as opposed to the carrots that needed to join together to make this work.
It's a bit of a cart before the horse exercise, clearly. So just for confirmation, if the infrastructure required to decarbonise shipping is not in place, should government not be investing in that first before introducing a scheme that increases costs for routes that people here depend on?
Yes, we agree with that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange. So there's actually, whilst the objective is to drive down emissions, that's not actually going to be the effect. In fact, just increase costs and trying to battle with the reality there.
Really, in the short to medium term, this will not affect decarbonisation. It will just increase the costs.
On operators, yeah. And just a wee final question. Was in relation to the risk assessment, but I think Michelle's touched on that fairly strongly, actually. Given our dependence here and out of the entirety of the UK, Northern Ireland has the highest level of such activity. A specific risk assessment economic risk assessment probably would be much more beneficial. Do you see that happening?
We don't, but we see it as very appropriate, and one of the reasons we have asked for a delay in the implementation. I think that is essential information required in taking any decision. Otherwise, we walk into this with no clear knowledge of how it's going to affect the economy and the flow of trade.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
No problem. And Declan?
Yeah, Chair, thanks for letting me in. I suppose what I'm trying to bottom out here is that we got the correspondence from the department in relation to this trading scheme, and what I'm picking up is that if we don't align the UK and the EU ETS, that our businesses here could be hit by the EU carbon adjustment mechanism, and that there's 7 billion within scope which could be hit by CBAM, and this result in larger administration and direct costs which would be collected by the EU. So what I want to know is, which would be the biggest impact for businesses if the two schemes didn't align? Would the impact of the additional costs by CBAM be greater or lesser than the projected costs that you say would come about if the UK ETS did come in here?
So it's quite a difficult analysis, but from my understanding, the CBAM hits 7 different products, but the ETS hits all products and all finished, raw, whatever. And so really the CBAM is there to, it's about the kind of competition of specific producers of those materials. But the ETS covers everyone because it's everything from raw material to finished good. And therefore, whatever the scheme, is it between 5 and 7 products in the CBAM, you would have to put a proper economic assessment to work out that trade-off, which would be more expensive, especially given that CBAM isn't relevant to either this SI or kind of how it works for maritime.
Can I just jump in? I still don't think it's an either or. I think that you will still have the transportation costs. And I think I'm not really sure what the linkage is here directly.
The Minister's in after, guys. I think it's an important one to tease out because it's in the departmental written statement. I'm not convinced it is and the other thing is to accept without the guarantee that it does offer protections is a risk.
Absolutely.
And without the economic assessment, I mean, we don't have an economic assessment on the impacts.
And, when they're talking about exports, well, I think we are quite heavily dependent on imports, and we import a lot more than we export. So, yes, that figure might be high, but this is an import tax on everything, and not even import from the international, it's import from GB to NI. It's not even international, so...
Just before doing it, was John wanted in first? Yes. Just on this, just on the CBAM, just a very quick one. So I think it's 6 items: cement, iron, steel, aluminium, fertilisers, mainly nitrogen-based hydrogen, and electricity. If that is accurate, so don't take that as absolute, but that's you're quite correct. You got it right. Between 5 and 7, which is 6. Excellent.
And I think for electricity, I don't think Northern Irish electricity is included. It's in the EU ETS, so.
Yeah. But it's not absolutely. Sorry, thank you. Continue.
Yeah, I suppose what I wanted to finish out was, as follow-up then, was you'd indicated, Paul, that it would be better if the two schemes were aligned. So I just want to work out what would it take for the EU and the UK ETS to mirror each other? What are the flaws, I suppose, in the UK ETS that currently exists? You touched on some of them there. To align both of them, what would it take to align them?
Yeah, so I'm happy to cover that. So I've already covered the enforcement piece, so that there's a level playing field and the markets are they contain their integrity. On the data quality, we highlighted this risk to the UK government because when Brexit happened, the UK MRV had to be created to replicate its previous obligations with the EU. The scope of that is different to what's being proposed. So the quality of data needed to underpin how much you actually owe needs to be tested out. That's why the EU always phases in and says you must report your emissions first. And then once we've had 1 or 2 years of that, we will then say your subsequent reporting will then attract liability for allowances. The UK has not done that for maritime here because, we don't really know why they haven't done it because they've done that for the waste incineration industry, given that ability to ensure the data quality is up to scratch. Because although operators have been collecting some data, it's been sitting on corporate spreadsheets internally and not been submitted to UK government because there was no mechanism to submit that MRV data to UK government post-Brexit. So I think the data quality is a real serious issue and it's not a delay for the sake of it. If you want the EU regime to be keep its integrity, the UK's data also must have that same integrity, which it doesn't have at the moment.
I think just taking one other point, I think the UK scheme lacks that clear mechanism for how the revenue raised is going to be used to support decarbonisation. And that's a fundamental difference, and I think it's a big omission in the UK scheme, and that's a point that we've raised consistently throughout.
It also puts us at a competitive disadvantage if we can't access the same revenues as those in the EU. There's also a very quick point on the offshore sector as well, where the current rules, whether you align or don't align, is going to create a lot of distortion, where you'll be disincentivizing UK ships calling from Northern Irish or UK ports to service UK offshore wind farms. I can explain more later, but again, those rules, they need a dialogue between the UK and the EU to iron that out so you're not disincentivizing using your own ports for your own offshore wind farms.
Okay, just before I bring John in, I think John is going to finish us out here and the Minister's outside too, is just to make members aware there are 2 amendments in the House of Lords to this, one by Baroness Hoey and one by Lord Moynihan. So they're just worth looking at if you want to pick them up on the other sides. It's obviously another step to take in regard to that. So, John, do you want to finish this out here?
Chair, a very quick one. Really grateful for all of the information you've given us, but I suppose I have to ask, I'm surprised we hadn't touched on this previously. You will understand, I'm sure, that we're also, as an Environment, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, regularly contacted, both at committee and constituency level, by people extremely concerned about water quality and air quality. So do you agree that some scheme of this kind has to exist to encourage those who are not willingly investing in decarbonisation? And can I ask, if it wasn't this, what scheme would you suggest?
I don't think we've got a suggestion in terms of an alternative, but I do believe that decarbonisation is fundamentally important, and I think that we as an industry and we as a business fully support decarbonisation, but I think it's the mechanism here that they're using today is what we're questioning, and also the lack of any economic impact assessment on will it bring benefits or will it do more damage in terms of making Northern Ireland less competitive now?
And just to come in there, I think the importance of a fuel standard is what will actually really drive the decarbonisation, both from a global, setting that standard from a global, but also the EU has set that standard as well, so that has a huge influence on the UK as well.
Okay.
Okay, members, are we content? Members content? Yep. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really do appreciate the correspondence, the detailed witness session that you gave us, and we have the Minister in shortly, so I'm sure some of the questions will probably float in that direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So members, with your permission, this is an SI, so it's just something that gets either the assent or not of the committee. It's not something that we pray against or offer amendments to. So, but I'm going to suggest we don't do that at this stage, if you don't mind, because the Minister is going to be coming in. And what I'm going to propose to do with the Minister, if he's reminded, is because this is fresh, if we have a very brief discussion with the Minister on this to allow the Minister maybe to respond to it. And at that point, I will ask then the committee for their view on it. And then we'll move into the second part of that session, which is the straightforward meeting with the Minister. Are members content? And I'll outline to the Minister what that looks like and get the Minister's permission. Right. Minister, I'm just going to lean into your better side here and ask you if you would indulge us. So before you give us your evidence or whatever, we've just had a session with the maritime organisations on this SI, so we've taken some evidence from them, but I didn't put the question to the committee because I thought it only fair to delay it until perhaps we could maybe ask you a few questions based on the submission. And at that stage, Minister, we're not going to ask you any other questions. At that stage, I'm going to then ask the committee for their position on the SI, and then we'll move on to the additional business, if you're okay with that.
Look, I understand this is an important issue, Chair, and also, officials are available to engage with yourselves in terms of some of this, because it is quite technical around this, whether you wanted to meet on Monday in advance of the debate on Tuesday to engage with officials, happy to facilitate that, or I'm happy to answer any questions you have today, whatever way works around this, because I understand there was quite a lot there from the witnesses that came through to yourselves that you might want to drill into and stuff like that.
I'll open up with the brief one, and then we'll take from members if they like. And members, our time is quite tight here. What the maritime sector were pointing to is that the EU, ETS and the UK don't actually mirror each other in respect of how they support their relative and respective industries and behind. And what they had alluded to was the need for a delayed implementation and a staged approach. So they weren't necessarily saying that it had to be kicked into touch because they recognise the need for decarbonisation. What they see this is, in the UK sense, as a draconian tax that doesn't actually incentivise decarbonisation in any way, and that locally we don't have the options for them. We don't have onshore charging for the ships, evidently, in the harbours. And secondly, there is the lack of provision for other biofuels, for instance, methanol, and the exorbitant price if it was there. But they're kind of ready for it. Have you any update in terms of any dealings with the UK government in regards to dispensation for Northern Ireland, or its unique position, given that 90% has been alluded to as our trade going back and forward?
Yeah, so just a couple of things. This has been proposed and been discussed for a number of years now, so it should be of no surprise to the industry that this is coming before yourselves. There is a wider goal, and it's something that so many stakeholders are raising with me in terms of linking the UK and the EU ETS and CBAM. That's something that's a real prize from these negotiations, and the UK government are progressing with that. And from engagement with DESNES, sorry for the acronyms around this, the understanding is that this, in terms of ETS Maritime, is a prerequisite for the linkage of those schemes. So just to be very conscious in terms of when we're engaging in this, in terms of the wider impacts around this. The other issue is that, the ETS has been proven to be very successful in terms of driving decarbonisation. There is an issue here that ETS Maritime is applying between GB and the Republic of Ireland. So in order to ensure parity and not to have gaming around this, it's important that we have this applying in terms of routes from GB to Northern Ireland, and that's why that's being sought. And it's important that we were able to understand the need to support industries in regards to decarbonisation, and I totally get that. My department's been engaging quite heavily with DESNES on that, and as Minister, I've secured agreement with the UK Government's Department of Transport to ensure a Northern Ireland Pacific event is held, which will drive local engagement to the recently announced additional £271 million to boost to shipping and coastal communities, and that will and I will work with the UK Government to support the Northern Ireland maritime sector to secure good outcomes for this opportunity. So there's support there. We're going to make sure that people engage in Northern Ireland around this. This is something that has been on their agenda for quite a while, and also in terms of companies, for example, Stena, they operate within the EU, so they'll be used to ETS Maritime already. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
No, just that to pick up on the point the Chair makes, from our perspective, and I know from a UK-wide perspective, it is the linking of the two schemes that facilitates the sort of removal of the barrier and the exemption from CBAM, and that is, I think, an absolutely crucial point from a trading perspective.
Just on that, do you mind if I just pick up on that one, because that was a very important point we got to at the end, Katrina, the linkage with CBAM, and it was pointed out that CBAM only applies to 6 component parts, but actually our trade, which will be linked to the ETS, is infinitely greater than that. Would that be, so their suggestion is that the linkage is an unfair linkage, it doesn't actually apply, based on the fact that ETS covers just everything from food passenger to every trade item, chilled foods, so on and so forth, where CBAM only applies to 6 component parts.
Although what we hear consistently is the importance of the CBAM linkage, and that is raised so many times, whether you're here, whether you're in Brussels, whether you're in GB, whether you're in the south, that avoidance of divergence has come up, I think, Minister, time and time again.
So we'll be very careful not to underplay the importance of linkage of those CBAM schemes, and it's something that's been regularly raised with me in terms of the desire for that. I know you've taken witnesses in terms of maritime here this morning, but also there's responsibility upon us all to make sure we take evidence from a broad range of stakeholders in regards to this, and ensure that that feeds into our decision making.
I totally agree. The difficulty, I suppose, is occurred to me is that this should be about reducing our carbon footprint, but it seems to me that the opportunities for reducing carbon footprint are limited, given that we don't have the infrastructure to support that, and then this does look like a tax. I know it's not taxed by yourself, Minister, but it's something that's what it looks like to me. So, members, is there anything else on this specific topic for the Minister before we? But I would be minded to then ask the question of the committee, unless there's anybody else.
Just one question. It became clear in our discussion prior to you arriving that there had been no robust economic assessment done on the implications of this on the Northern Ireland GB route. And that's quite worrying, given the representation that I've had from hauliers and others about the consequences of this on their business, but also on the potential uplift of the price of goods for consumers. So I'm really just looking for your comment with regard to that.
Yeah, I'm surprised at that comment. I'm surprised at some of the comments that were made this morning around that, because there has been significant engagement and a significant assessment in terms of impacts around this. Is there anything more you want to say on this?
Just to say that there was an impact assessment completed. It was published in November 2025, and it was accompanied by an additional specific Northern Ireland study that was undertaken to supplement the wider impact assessment, and it showed, I am informed, marginal impact. So from our perspective, a full impact assessment was carried out, and that included consideration of the potential impacts in Northern Ireland, and that's published and available.
You're suggesting it was marginal impact. Obviously, officials who came to just a couple of weeks ago, I felt downplayed the economic impact, but yet when you speak to those who are actually practitioners and are actually going to be directly impacted by this, they see something very different.
Yeah, and that's our perspective around this. We need to just be conscious here. What we're trying to do here in terms of the wider negotiations between the UK and the EU is address concerns that have been raised with me for the last number of years in relation to linkage between the two ETS schemes and also CBAM. We have ETS Maritime in place between the GB and the Republic of Ireland at 50%. What we're seeking to do is bring in parity in relation to that between GB and Northern Ireland, and there is a risk of gaming if that doesn't occur.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think the case they're making is that Northern Ireland isn't like GB mainland because we are an island which relies on 90% of east-west trade through that, and the rest of the GB wouldn't apply. And the derogation for different reasons in Scotland, the Scottish Isles. But anyway, is there any other points that anybody wants to raise with the Minister on this? And I'll put the question. And I think, unfortunately, given the fact that it's coming on forward on Tuesday, I don't think, Minister, and I appreciate you raising the point that the officials could be available on Monday, but I think I'm okay to take my position on it today. Because we're stressed with everything else. Members content that I put the question to the committee, and then we'll move on to the other business. Is there any other alternative proposals, Declan?
Chair, all I can just say is, from our perspective, we've received a huge volume of information in the last hour and a half here in relation to this here, and I just think, I know we've found it very difficult to make a decision today. Certainly, I'll be holding off any decision today. We will anyway until we deliberate more on over the course of the weekend, because there's a lot of stuff for us to absorb and continue to get into.
So I'm going to make a proposal, Declan, and put it to committee. I'm happy either way, because the SA will be moved on Tuesday. The committee doesn't have to take it can take a position where it didn't come to a conclusion, and each party can make their own statements based on that and vote accordingly, because that's what will happen on it anyway. But if members are then minded to do so, I'm happy if you wanted to convene a really short meeting on Monday, just to take this and put the question, and then but I'm not minded that unless anybody else wants to take any more evidence. I'm not sure that bandwidth-wise.
Officials would be happy to come on Monday if you wanted to do that, to answer any questions.
You're minded, don't want to.
There's so much information that even come in today that I want to just
time to digest it. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, members. Then what I'm going to suggest is that one item agenda piece of business on Monday morning.
Okay.
Is that okay? Could we agree a time on that for 11 o'clock? 11 o'clock, okay? And we'll try and seek a room. If we can't get a room, members will do it via Zoom or Teams. Okay. Getting a room might be.
Do you want officials or?
On standby maybe, because there could be other questions that comes out of this over the weekend. So I think that
we can ask them to do that.
And if there are things in advance
send them
that
through.
It's useful to sort of give them a heads up on, so they can be ready with answers, just let us know.
Members content?
Yeah.
Are you okay with that? Sorry. The minister suggested it. Okay. Yeah.
Asked them before I came, so don't worry.
All right.
This is even the last point that Katrina made there about the impact assessment carried out in 2025. I'd like to get a chance to read that.
I think that
For example,
that's a good point, Acton. The difficulty is there's a difference between a specific financial impact assessment and a full impact assessment. The full impact assessment will be more general, but side of it would be useful, and because there seems to be a divergence of the impact, regardless. Members content with that? Okay, then that's what we're going to do, Clerk. If we could see if we can get a room. If we can't get a room, we'll move it online, and the officials will be there if required. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Minister, if you want to then lead in with any briefing that you want to give the committee and then move to questions.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to return to the committee today. Since my last appearance on the 4th of December, my department has continued to make progress on the priorities set out in our corporate plan. Before I get into the detail, I wish to acknowledge the constructive engagement with the committee members in recent months, both with individual members and also through ongoing scrutiny of the department's work. As ever, delivery requires close collaboration across government, strong relationships with stakeholders and industry, and ongoing engagement with our farming and rural communities. However, as Chair, at the outset, I think it's important for me to recognise the broader strategic context in which we are operating. My department continues to operate in a highly constrained financial environment. As members are aware, there is no agreed executive budget to provide planning certainty, although the Minister for Finance has published proposed allocations as part of his consultation. The multi-year nature of the budget intensifies the challenge, with decisions in 1 year carrying consequences for later years. The Department is facing significant pressures on both resource and capital budgets. My officials and I are working through internal allocations based upon what is a draft budget from the Finance Minister, and the Finance Director will brief the committee soon once this process concludes. In outline in regards to the resource position, we will struggle to stand still in regards to that. The Finance Director will set out more to yourselves around that, but you know that we have challenges, particularly in relation to resourcing across all aspects of the department, whether it's in relation to both agriculture, environment, rural affairs, and also climate change, and the resource budget will be extremely challenging for us. In relation to capital, the budget will also be challenging. As you know, there's major capital projects which we're seeking to proceed with, such as the Veterinary Science Building and also new buildings in Greenmount and Lockery, and we will struggle to be able to deliver all of those within the envelope that we have received in the pace at which we would like to do. Also, I think it's important to outline to you that DAERA is a high-performing paying agency and has maintained excellent performance targets in respect of payment of farm payments. Farm businesses have come to expect annual payments to commence on the 1st of September, with approximately 98% of payments being successfully processed on this date. For the standard to be maintained for this year, a confirmed budget would need to be known by early July of this year to facilitate payment processes and also in terms of the activities that are required associated with that. If budget agreement is not reached until later in the year, payments will be delayed, but entitlement trading and applications and associated validation will have taken place. I think it's important to acknowledge these issues and important the need to agree a budget for the year ahead, and ideally for the multi-year budget and the opportunities that can deliver for us across government. There is constraints being faced within the farming sector, and I acknowledge those. These are compounded by external pressures, such as, for example, poor weather, also market volatility affecting the agri-food sector, and we're seeing that in recent days. Also in terms of evolving UK and EU regulatory dynamics, animal health risks, which we will talk about today, and also then alongside that we have public concern around environmental quality, which we all need to work together to address. Together, these factors shape our programmes and operational capacity, and they underline the need for prioritisation, clear evidence-based decision-making, and strong value for money. Continued engagement with the Executive, this Committee and sector partners will be essential as we navigate these pressures to deliver our corporate plan commitments. In this context, I will have to make difficult decisions as we seek to prioritise and safeguard essential programmes and, most importantly, deliver our statutory functions. Within this challenging context, I want to provide an integrated update across our major programmes, highlighting progress planned and in terms of the actions in the months ahead. In regards to blue tongue, since the first confirmed outbreak of the blue tongue virus on the 29th of November of last year, I and my officials have worked intensively with the industry to manage what has been a fast-moving situation. There's been 5 confirmed cases of the blue tongue serotype 3 in Northern Ireland since the 29th of November, and all surveillance measures were completed within the 20-kilometre temporary control zone which was established around the sites in County Down. The TCZ currently remains in place with pre-movement testing requirements for high-risk animals moving out of the TCZ. I've made available financial support to cover these laboratory costs for those farmers impacted by the pre-movement testing requirements. I know that restrictions have had undesirable consequences for the industry. I acknowledge that, particularly in relation to trade between the Republic of Ireland and GB and Northern Ireland. DAERA's Blue Tongue Disease Control Framework makes clear that decisions on lifting control zones will be based on epidemiological and science evidence and necessary consideration of the economic implications for the sector. Given this, I acknowledge concerns from the industry on the continued restrictions as a result of the TCZ. My officials have been engaged intensively with stakeholders in next steps, and I hope to be able to make an announcement on this, hopefully either today or tomorrow. Further details will be made available shortly via appropriate communication channels and on the DAERA website, and this is something we're working at pace in regards to, and I got a briefing about that in written format just before the meeting. In relation to the impacts on trade to other Member States, including the Republic of Ireland, it is possible for Member States, including Northern Ireland, to authorise certain derogations set out in EU animal health law to enable movement of animals between Member States which have declared BTV incursions. I and my officials continue to engage closely with counterparts in Ireland and GB on whether it is appropriate to authorise the application of the derogations in Northern Ireland. We also acknowledge the impact of the ban on movements for breeding and production between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. This is also something I hope to be able to make an announcement about either today or tomorrow. Stakeholders will be notified promptly of any changes. From one animal health challenge to another in relation to bovine tuberculosis. Northern Ireland continues to experience persistently high rates of bovine TB. Herd incident rates stand at 9.9%, and this year's programme costs are forecast to exceed the £60 million spent in 24-25, a level that is clearly not sustainable, both in terms of the stress on farm families and also the public purse. Significant work is already underway, expanding the interferon gamma testing, subject to funding, launching a vet-led biosecurity scheme for farms, and strengthening TB testing processes. Preparatory work is progressing well on a forthcoming consultation on wildlife intervention options, ensuring that future decisions are fully informed and evidence-based. In parallel, we are advancing the North West Regionalisation Initiative with the Irish Government, which I was delighted to launch alongside Minister Hayden last month. This shared island-funded pilot marks a highly positive step forward in strengthening cross-border cooperation and developing effective approaches to tackling TB. Building on our animal health responsibilities, I want to turn to animal welfare. Members will recall I published my animal welfare pathway in May last year, setting out forward-looking reforms to be delivered of the remainder of this mandate. Good progress has been made, including establishing an expert group to review dog breeding legislation and, following public consultations, taking final decisions on mandatory CCTV in abattoirs and the introduction of Lucy's Law. Further positive work includes developing a responsible dog ownership campaign and preparing a pre-summer consultation on proposals including banning aversive training devices, updating microchipping rules, and regulating rescue and rehoming organisations. I will now focus on one of our most urgent programme for government commitments and a central challenge for us all, tackling climate change. Recent extreme weather has been a stark reminder of the challenges we face. Statistics from the Met Office have confirmed that January was the wettest month in nearly 150 years, and 2025 is both the warmest and sunniest year on record in the UK since 1884. This extreme, unpredictable weather and other climate-related impacts are already disrupting normal farming patterns, increasing livestock disease risks, reducing yields, and driving up costs for farmers. Progress in climate action depends on everyone working together. Following last year's consultation on our first climate action plan, the summary of responses will be published shortly. Members will have the opportunity to examine in detail in the coming weeks. The plan will set out how Northern Ireland will deliver the emissions reductions required under our first carbon budget. Subject to executive agreement, I hope the final plan can be published before the summer recess. In parallel, work has begun on our second climate action plan, which must be considerably more ambitious to meet the 48% emissions reduction target by 2030. The plan will set out actions across all departments to deliver our second carbon budget by 2033. More broadly, in December 2024, the Assembly agreed regulations setting our first three carbon budgets. A consultation level on the level for the fourth carbon budget has recently concluded. It sought views and aligning the budget with the Climate Change Committee advice, recommending a 77% emissions reduction against baseline levels for 2038 to 2042. This is in line with the 2040 target agreed by the Assembly in 2024. The summary of the responses has been published and shared with the committee. Over the weeks ahead, I will engage with executive colleagues with the intention of bringing draft regulations to the Assembly. I am pleased that the Executive has agreed to the establishment of a Just Transition Commission. Draft regulations are progressing through the Assembly, and I intend to launch the public appointments process as soon as possible following Assembly approval. You will have already received the draft regulations. I understand officials are due to brief the committee on the 12th of March. In terms of Lough Neagh, climate impacts and environmental pressures intersect most visibly in Lough Neagh. Restoring and protecting its ecological health remains a major priority, and we're now seeing clear momentum behind this work. Of the 37 actions in the Lough Neagh Action Plan, 19 have now been completed, and the remaining actions continue to progress. This progress reflects sustained cross-departmental collaboration, and I will keep the committee updated on progress. In terms of the Sustainable Agricultural Programme, supporting our agri-food and fishery sectors remains central to my department's work. I remain fully committed to ensuring the Executive's earmarked budget of approximately £330 million for agriculture, agri-environment and rural fisheries and rural development provides value for money for Northern Ireland citizens. The Farm Sustainability Payment and Farm Sustainability Standards came into effect from the 1st of January, and that demonstrates my clear commitment to supporting farmers whilst also delivering for the environment and meeting our animal health and welfare obligations. I am encouraged that almost 2,500 farmers attended recent CAFRE events, reflecting a high level of engagement and interest in both the current and future measures under the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. In December, I launched the Farming for Sustainability Innovation Scheme, which is already supporting farmers to adopt new ideas and innovative approaches that enhance sustainability and long-term resilience. Work is also progressing to further expand scope, reach and scale for the Farming with Nature package. This remains a key priority for me, supporting farmers to deliver biodiversity and enhance the environment across Northern Ireland. I intend also to bring forward a crisis framework to provide a structured approach to government intervention during major agricultural shocks, above and beyond the normal scope and responsibility within the Farm Sustainability Payment. And I understand a briefing from members is scheduled for April. Over the year ahead, I will continue to drive further progress across a range of initiatives, including bovine genetics, the Sustainable Farming Investment Scheme, and the Carbon Footprinting Project. Turning to our rural communities more broadly, I'm pleased to highlight the significant support being delivered across rural areas. Over the past 2 years, my department has provided grant aid totalling £13.19 million, supporting 4,877 rural organisations and businesses. This year, DAERA has committed over £8 million in rural grants to address poverty and isolation, benefiting around 160,000 rural dwellers. Our new rural policy, Rural NI, our new approach, is being developed in partnership with stakeholders to ensure it reflects the needs and ambitions of rural communities. Outline proposals were shared with Committee and Solace NI last year, and a 12-week public consultation will commence shortly. Following statutory review, I have agreed to extend the schedule to the Rural Needs Act Northern Ireland 2016 by including 54 additional bodies to ensure more consistent and meaningful consideration of rural needs across government. In relation to environmental governance, finally, Chair, improving environmental governance remains a priority. I brought forward a paper seeking executive agreement in principle to establish a new and independent environmental protection agency. Unfortunately, I have not received support from the Executive for this important reform, which would bring long-term benefits for everyone. This is disappointing and a lost opportunity to transform environmental governance here. Officials are, however, taking forward a number of recommendations from the independent panel's report and will brief the committee next week. I'm committed to improving the environment, and progress recently has included launch of the Nature Recovery Strategy for consultation and also the Waste Management Strategy, as well as recent publication of the final Marine Protected Area Strategy. In closing, Chair, across all of these areas, from climate action to water quality, from animal health to rural development, our focus remains clear: to deliver credible, evidence-based action that protects our environment and helps drive a sustainable and resilient economy for the future. Central to this is our commitment to supporting farming families whose hard work and stewardship continue to underpin our agri-food sector and rural way of life. One other matter just before I close, and the press release is issued this morning, but I think it's important I brief the committee in regards to this. A suspect case of notifiable avian influenza was reported on Tuesday the 3rd of March at a commercial poultry premises near Omagh. Preliminary results from AFBI indicate the presence of highly pathogenic avian influenza. Based on this and the clinical signs, the Chief Veterinary Officer has therefore taken the decision to introduce a temporary control zone around the premises. The keeper has been notified and plans are being made to start depopulation of the site today. My officials will be meeting with stakeholders and a press release will be issued today. As members will be aware, the avian influenza prevention zone and housing order are still in place across Northern Ireland. It is therefore now mandatory for all bird keepers, including owners of pet birds, commercial flocks, backyard and hobby flocks, to keep their birds indoors or otherwise separate from wild birds. This is the latest case. It is unfortunate but shows the risk of bird flu is still ever present. Avian influenza is a notifiable disease. Anyone who suspects an animal may be infected by a notifiable disease must, by law, report it to local DAERA Direct Office. I'm happy to take any questions from yourself this morning.
Thank you, Minister. And there can be absolutely no doubt, listening to what you shared with us today, that occupying the seat as Minister for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs is indeed complex. And you've set out some of the long-standing ambitions which you've shared with us in this committee, hopefully has offered a high degree of scrutiny and also help at times, but sometimes, Minister, it is incumbent upon us to ask harder questions. And you rightly pointed out that farming and agri is a priority, viability, stability, carbon reductions, emission reductions. This committee is particularly interested in clean water and clean air, but what goes hand in hand with that, Minister, also is confidence of all of those sectors. And I think it would be fair to say that in a number of weeks you haven't enjoyed the full confidence of particularly the farming sector, and indeed this week it has been raised again in and around confidence around AFBI in particular, Minister. Myself and another couple of members shared evidence that was given to us in regard to practice at AFBI, which came from a whistleblower and has evidently made its way into the media at the moment. Minister, I just want to be very blunt with you. What have you done and what are you doing to restore confidence in yourself? Because if we're going to affect these changes, all sectors are going to need to have confidence in you.
So in relation to the allegation around AFBI, the committee have shared those with ourselves. We have engaged with you. I know the AFBI were in with yourselves in regards to this. And I think it's important I set it out again for the record in relation to the situation that has been reported in recent days, because as a department we take animal welfare issues and also responsibilities to the environment extremely seriously. And in relation to the allegations that were raised with us, action was promptly taken in regards to that. So on receipt of those allegations, inspections of the site by both Veterinary Service and Northern Ireland Environment Agency took place on the 28th of October. The inspection by Veterinary Service found no issues of concern, and the inspection by Northern Ireland Environment Agency confirmed that allegations of slurry spreading outside the permitted period were unfounded. The Northern Ireland Environment Agency inspection did, however, identify sewage fungus in a waterway below the farm, which was assessed as a low severity incident. Remedial action was requested and carried out. NEA determined that formal enforcement action was not required. Northern Ireland Food Chain Certification, which provides inspection and certification services for Northern Ireland Beef and Lamb Farm Quality Assurance Scheme, and Red Tractor, also carried out an audit of the site in respect of its certifications on the 6th of November of last year at AFBI's request, and AFBI's accreditation was maintained. AFBI senior officials appeared before the DAERA Committee on the 29th of January of this year to brief the Committee on the recent AFBI data breach. However, I know yourself also asked AFBI about the allegations, and they were responded to. On the 2nd, I also say that, and I've referenced this, on the 2nd of December, DAERA Committee provided the Department with images relating to the allegations. AFBI reviewed the images and provided explanations for each. The majority of the photos appear to relate to circumstances in 2023 and 2024, and since this time there have been changes in line managers and line management structures. Departmental officials from Veterinary Service and NEA have also reviewed the images and confirmed that no additional actions were necessary. AFBI have taken several additional steps to strengthen controls and oversight of the Hillsborough Farm, including convening a board subgroup to review relevant documentation and make recommendations they see fit regarding standards at the Hillsborough Farm. The subgroup is expected to deliver a report by April 2026. Is there anything else further you want to say on this?
Just to add, Chair, that in every case where video or written evidence has been provided, we have made sure that every single one of them has been followed up. My line to our staff in Veterinary Service and to the NIA was that we might reasonably expect that AFBI would be having higher standards than other farms, and therefore I asked them to go out and carry out unannounced visits in every case where, so there is no scenario in which a piece of evidence has been provided to us that we have not followed up, and we have probably followed up more robustly than we would in any normal case. So I know that the media coverage has continued. It has shown clips that are, as far as I can tell, the same clips as those that were investigated last year. So that's the position. But if there is ever any new evidence, there is no scenario in which we would not follow it up, because I think it is absolutely reasonable that if you are a public body and you run a farm, and I would say the same thing to our staff in Caffrey, we need to be, and AFBI needs to be a role model.
Just two things on that before I move on to my next question is that AFBI evidently is in my constituency of Lagan Valley. Its proximity to Hillsborough Lake is something that must always be considered, and Minister, you had reflected some level of pollution there at some stage into a water course. Confidence is key to effecting change. Really is key. Has there been any reflection of addressing and giving confidence to the agri and farming sector in regard to AFBI, in regard to the makeup of the function, and perhaps a farmers forum as part of that, to feed into and to generate that confidence required to deliver the environmental challenges and changes that are evidenced?
So I know that AFBI are doing that engagement in terms of what you would describe as stakeholders, and farmers are an absolute critical part of that, and that's something that they are taking forward in terms of making sure that there is that stakeholder engagement around this. As I've outlined, we take these issues seriously. You received the allegations, you passed them on to us, we have investigated them, you've had AFBI in relation to this. So I reassure you that we take these issues very seriously. Anything that comes through is properly and fully investigated, and if anyone's aware of anything else, I would ask people to forward it on. One of the frustrations has been is that people have been saying, "Oh, I'm aware of this," and I say, "Could you pass it on?" And it hasn't, and people need to pass things on. Do you want to come in there on the farmers forum type of?
Yeah, I mean, I'm conscious AFBI has a wide range of responsibilities: agriculture, forestry, fisheries, natural environment, food, all the rest of it. And I think in every case there is a need to make sure there is strong stakeholder engagement with all of the component parts of the legislation that underpins AFBI. Yeah. So
I think it's an opportunity to springboard that and make it evidence it better, because I think genuinely the confidence piece I can't overemphasise enough. If it's not there, I think we could miss the targets that we have and that ambition.
I mean, you're absolutely right, Chair. AFBI's role is crucial. The work it does is so important, and that's why engagement becomes really important for it as well. And engagement in a way that can build confidence in the robustness of the work it does, and it does some amazing things.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on. I've got two more questions, Minister, and there's a lot of interest in regard to the members here. There was a lot of we all celebrated in terms of the ring fencing of the budget at the start, particularly I think £327 million, but unfortunately, as you've pointed out, around 20% of that resource budget is being swallowed up by BTB, bovine tuberculosis, and you did say that it would exceed £60 million. I've heard figures of 70 and 75. Are those figures something that you are projecting, or are you aware of, or how much above 60? And do you think it is sustainable, even given that we have a project in train, that has become a rudimentary part of our annual budget?
Okay, so Katrina will probably come on to the figures, but it isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable for us as a department, but more importantly, it's not sustainable for our farming community. The levels are too high. We need to get them down. And what I'm seeking to do is making sure we're taking decisions that are following proper process and based upon science and evidence, and there's lessons to be learnt in relation to previous interventions around this. But I get this. I see the mental health toll it has upon farm families. We're progressing in relation to the regionalisation initiative in the northwest and also in County Donegal, and also then we'll go out to consult in relation to wildlife interventions in the time ahead. Around that, but also we're looking to take interventions around the other pillars, which are people and cattle. Do you want to say about the
just the blueprint very much sets out the strategic way forward. Slight positive in that incident rates have fallen slightly over the last quarter, but falling from too high to still too high doesn't really help me, Chair. We need the costs to go down, and we need therefore to make sure we have action on all three pillars of the blueprint, on people, on wildlife and on cattle. And those measures are in place. Not all of them are universally popular, but what we have had to do as well is just to put a tighter piece of governance around the whole of the bovine TB work to make sure that everything is pulling in the right direction. So that is also has been in place now for a number of months, and all credit to Brian as Chief Veterinary Officer for insisting that there was a new look at governance to make sure that we can be accountable for the actions that are taken and for the results that they deliver. This is, although as Minister has often said, this is not going to be a short-term fix, but we need to see that curve turned because we can't sustain this.
Absolutely, it's a tragedy for farmers, it's a tragedy for the animals, and it's also a tragedy for your budget, Minister.
The taxpayer,
and
yes,
the taxpayer.
Absolutely.
It's, okay, thank you very much. And my final question before I move to the Deputy Chair then is in regard to, you might want to mention the Farming for Generations scheme and build out a bit on that, but we had last week in front of us UFU and the young farmers. And they did reference the previous land mobility scheme, which they had said that was very successful and something that there was a great deal of collaboration on. And given the challenges and the age profile within farming, how confident are you that the Farming for Generations will address that the ongoing challenge in the agri-sector in Northern Ireland, but particularly in around the land mobility scheme? Is there any scope in that for reintroduction?
Okay, so look, I totally get the importance of this. This is a key issue, not just Northern Ireland, but across the rest of the UK and Europe. If you look at in terms of the proposals the European Union are consulted upon in relation to common agricultural policy, they're quite radical in regards to how to address this issue. Our previous interventions didn't change the dial in regards to this, so we have to make sure if we're going to make new interventions, it's actually going to be effective in regards to that. So the pilot has been undertaken in terms of farming for the generations. I engaged with officials just recently in terms of the wider rollout of this, and then also alongside that, how do we put potential financial incentives around this, but making sure that they're good use of public money, that we're actually going to deliver the results that we want to achieve around this. I want to thank the stakeholders who have been engaging with us around this and their feedback in regards to that, because that has been quite important for us in terms of shaping this going forward, and hopefully we'll make some announcements in the time ahead and engage with the committee. One thing that will be critical around this is that if we're making regulations around this, we get support for that so we can move at pace in regards to this, because we get the importance of being able to have a scheme in place in regards to this. Anything else you want to say, Katrina?
Just that point you make around the effectiveness of interventions, and particularly at a point where public finances are so stretched, I think the onus will be on us to make sure that any new scheme demonstrates that it is actually going to make a difference, because as the Minister says, previous experience, including at European level, hasn't really changed the position.
Thank you, Mr. I'm now going to hand over to the Deputy Chair for further questions, and from that point the Deputy Chair will then be taking over the role as Chair. Okay.
Are you leaving now, Robbie? Then?
Yeah, if you want to do that and then change seats, even I'll speak to Clerk Chairman if you want to change seats after you've done that, Chair.
I thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Minister, and Katrina as well. I support what Robbie said about the young farmer issue, and I quoted some correspondence received here at the committee last week of a young woman who has had the opportunity to start farming. She's passionate about it, but is frustrated that as a new entrant she can't get new entitlements of her own from the regional reserve. Now, that new young farmer, sort of somebody you want in the industry, is frustrated about that there, and she'll be forced now to go and purchase or lease that of other farmers at a reduced rate, because there's going to be a purchase and a leasing price. So to me that's an example of where I think it was the wrong decision to close the regional reserve for new entrants, and that's one case study that I referenced here last week of many people who have spoken to us since that happened. Will that be reconsidered?
Yeah. So can I just set out to take a wee step back from this? We're having this discussion around this as a result of leaving the EU, that we have to design our own farm support policies, and the resource implications around that for our department are quite significant, and the level of change that has to be delivered is also challenging for us all, around us all. But we considered this last year. We were very clear in terms of the fact that the decisions had to be made so we could move forward in terms of deliver the Sustainable Agricultural Programme. We have to make sure the interventions we're making are actually delivering the change that we need around this, and that's why it's important we have a new scheme in place which actually delivers the outcomes we want, which is farming for the generations. I understand I've engaged with officials in terms of the proposals around that. I know that they'll want to engage with yourselves as a committee. It's one of the next steps in the time ahead, and happy to do that.
Yeah, and there will be a full there is underway a full evaluation of the pilot scheme, Declan. Just to make sure that any new proposals we bring, we can be absolutely confident that they represent value for money, because as the Minister says, this is now under our own Assembly's public expenditure rules and not aggregated at EU level.
I think it's also important just to constantly assess the impact of the new land that's available for eligible for the new farm sustainability payment, and the impact that will have on the availability of entitlements as well. The other thing we've been asked a lot about is the grant scheme. Maybe could you give us a flavour of it and what farmers might expect and when it is scheduled to open for applications?
Okay, so just to come back in terms of the eligibility criteria for the farm sustainability payment, that's a really positive move, because we're then bringing stuff that wasn't previously eligible into eligibility, which is really good for our environment and has been welcomed by so many environmental groups, and that's a positive thing that's been put in place. In terms of the grant scheme, is that the Sustainable Farm Investment Scheme? So that's moving through in terms of approvals. One of the issues here is about budget. I need to get a bit more certainty in relation to the budget situation in regards to that. I have engaged with the Finance Minister around this, and there isn't a full budget cover for that. So that's why I'll need support, whether it's in the finalised budget or in terms of prioritising that in monitoring rounds so we can deliver that support. I would say to you, Declan, that the Sustainable Farm Investment Scheme is absolutely critical for us to be able to deliver a just transition for farmers in relation to dealing with the challenges we have around, for example, air and water quality. And there is a just transition fund for agriculture, but that wasn't met in line with our bids. So we just need to find a way forward so we can support delivery of this scheme. If there's already something which is a statutory requirement, the scheme probably wouldn't go towards that, but this is about allowing people to take up technology, which provides us a way through it. And science and evidence is really, really important it may deliver inconvenient truths, but also finds us a gateway through some of our challenges. And the technology that's available first, for example, in relation to ammonia, is something I would like to see supported through that scheme.
And the last thing before I pass on around is one of the issues that we've been lobbied a lot about lately is the issue of poultry litter and poultry litter. A lot of people from the sector, obviously we have a surplus of litter here, but there's availability, there's a deficit, there's a willingness to take it in farms down the south where there's actually there's a pea deficit, but we have a pea surplus up here, and you are aware of the dialogue going on between SES and the National Parks and Wildlife Service in the south of Ireland. Have you any update on that there? Because that's a big issue for poultry farmers around here, but it's also it's a quick win to potentially look at the pea issue as well of helping lower that pea surplus that we have here.
Yeah, so I suppose two things. Moy Park / Pilgrims have Tully operating outside Ballymena, and that's a good model in terms of how we deal with this, but I understand that's operating at capacity. Whatever we do has to be in line with environmental law. In regards to this, I know NEA did engage with Shared Environmental Services to say in the absence of advice from the south that they should go ahead and determine the application. I know that there's been concerns, and I would raise it now before we come on to it, in terms of shared environmental services. I have to respect the different bodies that exist in Northern Ireland. Shared Environmental Services sits within Mid and East Antrim Council, but as a result of all the councils across Northern Ireland collaborating together to have that shared service. I know that there's been concerns that have been raised with me by some of yourselves in the committee, by also stakeholders in terms of how do they engage with shared environmental services. So I spoke to the president of the Northern Ireland Local Government Association last night and said that there is potentially a role here for NILGA in terms of collaborating amongst councils and how they can do that. So I spoke to him last night and he's going to follow that up, and I think there's a role there in terms of how do we make sure that we can properly engage with shared environmental services in a strategic manner to address some of the concerns you've set out.
Thank you for that. I can just suspend for 1 minute. Okay, we're back. We're back online here now for the presentation from the Minister, and the next person who is asked to ask a question is Michelle.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for your presentation this morning. It was quite a lengthy presentation, and I thank you for that. I just want to reflect, I suppose, over the last couple of days, and whether you like GB News or not. Dougie Beattie is doing his job, he's asking questions, and he's scrutinising. But on Tuesday, in some ways you demonstrated your own prejudice and contempt towards both him and GB News. And I don't believe that was your finest hour. In fact, I felt it was a little bit cringeworthy. Do you regret saying what you did, and will you withdraw the comment?
Okay, so I've got two things to say about that. There's been a number of broadcasts by GB News. The transcripts of those are being reviewed. I would be reluctant to say any more in regards to that because there's potential for legal action arising from that. In relation to the issues at hand in regards to AFBI at Hillsborough, I've outlined those to the Chair in terms of a response to the allegations which were received and the investigations which were undertaken. My department received requests for interviews from Mr. Beattie at GB News in October and November 2025. Mr. Beattie was asked to submit formal requests with details of what he wished to discuss, and while a formal request was received, he did not provide information or material on the allegations he wished to discuss, and as a result his requests were subsequently declined. I just want to say, in relation to these issues, we take animal welfare issues and environmental issues very seriously, and if there's any allegations received, they will be promptly and fully investigated.
So I take it from what you're saying that you have no intention either to withdraw or to apologise in relation to the comment that you made then on Tuesday?
No.
On the 3rd of November, I tabled questions in relation to the photographs and videos which I had seen. And I also asked the reasons why you refused to speak to the media on the 23rd of October in relation to the conditions at the farm at AFBI Hillsborough. And in response, you said on the 14th of November that prior to considering a request to speak to the media on these allegations, my department requested evidence and details of the allegations being made, and to date neither had been provided. And obviously photographs and the video had been provided as evidence at that time. I suppose the question really for me is that, was it the questions that were being asked, or was it the person who was asking the questions? And that I struggle a little with that, because had the BBC, ITV or perhaps Channel 4 asked the same questions, would they have got the same response? Now, you will be aware that I've asked a series of questions in relation to protocols within your department and across other departments just regarding interviews and press conferences. And you talked in response about an approach which ensures broad and balanced coverage, but yet this clearly doesn't include GB News within that. So I suppose really what I'm now asking moving forward, have any lessons been learned from this week? Will GB News be invited to AFBI Hillsborough as has been requested? Will they be invited to press conferences and interviews? And will questions also be taken from GB News? Or will the prejudice within, or perceived prejudice within your department towards that media outlet continue?
So AFBI has confirmed that following the video in which it invited groups to visit the farm, which was released on the 5th of February, Mr. Beattie reached out to AFBI to request a visit. He was asked to submit the request to AFBI's communications team for consideration. but my understanding is he has not done so. In regards to recent broadcasts by GB News, I've got a serious concern in relation to the accuracy of some of them. That's why the transcripts are being reviewed. I don't want to say anything further in regards to this. I will engage with the media. I'm happy to do that. But I also want to engage with the media in terms of the way that they're behaving, that it's been done in an impartial and in a correct manner.
You know my view in relation to AFBI, and I have great respect for the people who work there, and I was genuinely upset whenever I saw what was presented to me back in October, and as a consequence of that, then I submitted the questions. I do believe that you should have fronted this up earlier. I think that you should have had an interview, whether that be with GB News or be it with another media outlet, in order to discuss the findings at AFBI at a much earlier stage, in order to not only bring this to some sort of a conclusion, but also to protect in some way the integrity of AFBI and those who work there. Is it your plan to have a conversation with the media around what has gone on at AFBI?
So if there's any bids around this, I'm happy to receive them, but I'm here as Minister in the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to be scrutinised alongside officials in relation to the role that we do, and that's what I respect. This Assembly is set up to provide scrutiny, and I think it's important you do that. The media also do that as well, but I'm here this morning to answer any questions you've got, and I'm happy to do that.
Okay, well, one of the criticisms of the AFBI board is that there's no farming representative on that board, and obviously it's within your gift in order to appoint members to that board. Is it your intention to consider appointing a farming representative to the board?
So I wouldn't describe it as a gift, because I think that doesn't fully understand the importance in terms of the process that needs to be followed in regards to board appointments. All members of the AFBI board are appointed following a public appointment competition based on merit. These appointments are regulated by the Office of the Commissioner for Public Appointments in Northern Ireland. That's something that I've done, and I think the focus has to be in terms of ensuring that AFBI fulfills its statutory functions, and that's what we as a sponsor department seek to achieve.
Well, it was disappointing that we couldn't get a definitive answer in relation to that. You know that I've been communicating with you in relation to the Isle of Man and the challenges with the fishing industry. Can you provide an update in relation to ongoing discussions, if any, and also any plans that you have to assist the fishing industry?
Okay, so I've been on the record, and I want to restate it here today, that I am very concerned about the decision from the Isle of Man government, which is affecting access for Northern Ireland fishing vessels into Isle of Man waters. I am meeting with industry representatives this afternoon in regards to this. I've been in correspondence with the Isle of Man government in regards to this matter, and I intend to travel to the Isle of Man later on this month to meet with them in regards to this issue and to make representations in terms of the impact it's having, and hopefully get a better understanding from them that the need to address this issue in terms of the detrimental impact that it's having. In correspondence that has came back from the Isle of Man government, they have set out that that there has been no recent changes to the Isle of Man immigration legislation or changes to visa requirements for non-British and non-Irish nationals working in the island's territorial waters, and they set out then what the current legislation is. The issue for me is that this is a matter that has came very without any notice. It is having a severe impact in terms of our fishing industry and needs to be addressed. And as part of this engagement back to me, there is a desire for them to work constructively on these matters and explore practical solutions together, and that's what I intend to do. I'm also, alongside meeting industry representatives, looking forward to engaging with a number of elected representatives who have raised this issue with me, and I understand the concern around this. Okay,
and obviously the only practical solution would be that Northern Ireland vessels are exempt from the current policy that's being implemented by the Isle of Man.
And I would agree with that, Michelle. I think that's where we want to get to. And I'm going to try my best to try to find a way forward in this, because I know the impact that this is having and how sudden it came about.
The final question which I was going to ask was in relation to Blue Tongue and obviously the lifting of the TCZ. I'm very conscious with it being within my constituency and the impact that that has, particularly on the movement of animals, but also the economic impact that it's having on St. Feed Mart, who have really been caught up in the middle of this from day one. And I suppose it was really, and you know, I was looking for some type of support for them during this process.
Yeah, so we're working through this at pace, hopefully make an announcement later today or tomorrow morning around that. If you wish, obviously officials can come to the committee to brief you in regards to this. I get the importance of this, and that's why we're working at pace around this. I have been very conscious in terms of the impact in terms of the farming community, and that's why we intervened and I issued a ministerial direction in relation to some of the costs associated with testing of animals to move out of the zone in regards to it. We all have to be very conscious that this is something that could come back in terms of further outbreaks in terms of blue tongue in Northern Ireland, such as the nature of how climate change and how this has moved much further north than what we expected it to do, and we'll continue to engage with stakeholders. We're one single epidemiological area, so we've been engaging with our colleagues in the south very closely in regards to this, alongside our colleagues in the rest of the UK. Katrina, is there anything more you want to say?
No, I don't think so. I'm aware of the correspondence and happy to follow up with officials coming to the committee or separately, Michelle, on the particular issue, but I know that's been the subject of some formal correspondence, so there may be limits to what we can say.
I think it's also, Chair, and sorry I'm using your time up here, but I think it's important we put it on record. Whilst this is a concern for the farming community, particularly in terms of the impact on trade, this has no issues in terms of food safety and public health, and it's important to re-emphasise that.
Right, thank you for that. And we'll move on around the room. Anya?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and Katrina, for coming in to brief us. First of all, I want to touch on just transition, and I want to welcome the development of those regs coming through. And just in that space, I suppose any future recommendations that the Commission may make and hopefully do make, how do you foresee your department actually properly implementing any of those recommendations, specifically around rural communities, so ensuring that those recommendations are going are fully reflecting the communities that they're supposed to support?
Yeah, and I think that sits actually in some ways quite nicely alongside the work on the new rural policy as well, because the resilience of rural communities is going to have to be climate resilience as well as economic and societal resilience. In terms of the regulations, so the Climate Change Act itself defines very well, you know, the full gamut of just transition considerations. So the Commission will be able to advise on any aspects of those. I think a bit like we do with the Climate Change Committee, we will take that expert advice and it will be used to inform policy, not just policy development, but policy responses in terms of what is the right thing to enable the transition that's needed and how do we make sure that it's fair. But that will be getting the Commission up and running is the key priority for the moment. It will have a job to do in terms of providing us with advice, but it will of course be providing other departments with advice, because we have the Just Transition overarching responsibility and the Just Transition responsibility for agriculture, but every sector will need support and advice and challenge to make sure that it is adapting its policies in a way that is fair and just. And I think the Minister mentioned earlier the work now on CAP 1 coming to an end and hopefully coming to the committee and then to the executive very shortly. The real challenge then will start as we finalise the Climate Action Plan 2 in light of the carbon budgets approved by the Assembly, and I think that's going to mean that there will be an even greater demand and need for advice on just transition.
And Katrina, just on that piece of just transition, and I know, to be fair to Patsy, when he was on the committee, I think he nearly raised it every week, around the Commission itself and the fund. How is it going to be funded?
Yeah, the Commission will be funded to provide advice. We will provide core funding for it. Other departments will inevitably provide, if they need very bespoke advice, they will have to support the Commission to provide that. The Just Transition Fund for Agriculture is a separate fund. Minister's already referenced that. That's been part of our bids in the budget, and it is really crucial if we're going to support particularly the agri-food sector, to make the changes in practice that will need to be made to comply with the law.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katrina.
Sorry.
I've a few. The rural policy framework, and I know I asked you both about it when you were last in, and again we're trying to, well, hopefully see it out to consultation ASAP. It feels almost as if it's fell into the Bermuda Triangle.
They're going out next week.
Next week?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Because again, it's, look, and I know the amount of work that has went into it has been absolutely brilliant. And all of those groups that have fed into it, and it wasn't an easy piece of work to embark upon in order to get right, especially. So it's brilliant that it's out of the Bermuda Triangle, and hopefully will be online next week. I'm going to switch things totally here. On an interest chair, I sit on the TEO committee as well, and we had officials in to brief us on violence against women and girls. And I was very, very happy to hear that they are embarking on a piece of work with yourselves at the minute, RCN and Nerwin as well, through the community-led review. Just in that space, and that review is brilliant because it will give rural women a voice to engage, and will allow the department and those groups as well to fully understand the challenges that rural women face in that space. But I suppose more broadly for your department, Minister, what more could be done internally?
Well, I think that is an excellent piece of work that's been taken forward. Ending violence against women and girls is a priority within the programme for government, but it's also a priority for Katrina and I, and for the department, and I think it's a priority for the rest of society, because we have to address this. This is I'm going to go quite upset about some of this, but we've seen some things in recent year which has told us that we have a major problem here, and we need to face it. And what we will do as a department, we will do with focus and working with others. But there's a wider issue here in terms of the society, and there's an event just this week in terms of us all having responsibility to challenge attitudes and ensure that we have good role models in society, and particularly in terms of the online space and the implications that can have. So this is something we're very conscious of, particularly in terms of rural communities. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'm just very conscious that it is the week of International Women's Day, and one of the things we will be doing on Friday as part of the civil service is looking not just at the role that women play in the civil service, but also at how we can support others. And I know that Women's Aid will be part of that conversation. You know, Anya, and I mean others know, I mean, we had to face the reality the end of July last year with one of our own colleagues of the impact of violence against women and children, and that has left its own mark. So even if we were passionately committed to this before, we now feel it's personal, and we owe it that we play our own part. So the community-led review, I think, is really important. But we're also looking with TO colleagues at where else do we have touch points that might actually allow us to identify risks, and do our staff, for example, know enough to know what to do if they did suspect that a customer or a client was at risk of domestic violence. We have training programmes that we are encouraging all staff to take up. But this, as I say, this feels personal to us, and we want to make sure that we do everything we can to support colleagues in the Executive Office on the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy.
No, absolutely, and obviously reference the tragic events that took place in Maguire's Bridge last year, and obviously that has been even within your department and colleagues, that has been a horrific time for everyone
and that's
involved.
Felt, you know, and so many of you will know, I mean, that's felt right across a community, whether it's, you know, children at school, or whether it's work colleagues, or whether it's family, or whether it's sports mates. You know, those impacts are deeply felt, and they're felt for a very long time.
I just want to thank you for raising this, because this is a key issue, and the role of stakeholders, often done on a voluntary basis, is absolutely totally invaluable. Katrina and I were down in Newry, engaging with Women's Aid along with the Justice Minister, and seeing that the work that they're doing, that is something that is literally a lifeline.
Yeah, and there is an issue that we know there are particular risks with women in rural communities where they can feel isolated, where there may be traditions that do not value the full place of women, where it may be harder to reach out and get support, where you may worry, and this was explained to us, that you know what it's like when you live in a small town. People know you, so if you're seeking help or support, would somebody see you? So there are different issues, and I think that's where the third sector also has a massively valuable role to play in providing those places of support. But the complexity, I think, of violence against women and girls is made more so if you're in an isolated rural community. But I think also the point the Minister makes is right. There is something around making sure that in engagement with women and girls our tone is respectful, because that can give rise to different sets of behaviours.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more. Rural crime. I just want to touch on it. Has been very, very pertinent over the last number of weeks in my own constituency. We're a small rural area in the Knox. A resident suffered a very violent break-in. And the community have been absolutely fantastic in terms of the response, organising at that grassroots level. They've formed a community neighbourhood watch now. So I suppose in a broader piece of rural crime, Minister, what steps or what further steps could your department take in order to support those rural communities that do face, whether it's violent crime, whether it's thefts and things like that?
Katrina can come in on this, but we engaged quite heavily with all the other partners around this, and I was at an event just recently down in Kilkeel in terms of us engaging with the police and the Locks Agency and other bodies in relation to poaching and how we can cooperate in regards to that. I know that this is something that can be really difficult in terms of rural communities, in terms of being able to get the evidence around it, because there's not many people in the area, particularly in regards to farm machinery, and then also we've had livestock being reported, and then the violent crimes that you've outlined. So it's something that we do cooperate around this. I think the new policy that we're bringing forward will be really important in terms of how do we ensure that rural communities are brought into everything that we're doing as government.
Yeah, and I think that's very much, and the committee has been, I know, very supportive of the work, but that sense of thinking about the needs of a rural community baked in at the start of policy and service delivery and not picked up at the end. But just to add, we have good relationships with PSNI, obviously lead for investigating rest of PSNI, but understanding and working with them to help understand what the issues are, what prevention looks like, what detection looks like, I think is really important.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel?
Thanks, Chair. Minister, just first of all, something quite topical. At about 5 o'clock yesterday, there was an incident declared in my constituency of West Rome, which I share with Tom Buchanan and Declan McAleer, preliminary avian influenza. Could you give us a bit of an update in relation to that and what actions your department are taking in supporting local farmers who understandably are quite concerned in relation to this in the immediate area?
Yeah, so we have obviously making announcements today and engaging with stakeholders on this. There was a suspect case on Tuesday. We get preliminary results back and we respond to that quite promptly. There is a depopulation of the site occurring from today around this. My thoughts are with the farmer that's been affected around this primarily in regards to this. This is something that is indiscriminate in terms of the impact it has, and I fully appreciate that. And I want to thank officials for responding quite promptly in regards to this. We have a wider messaging which we'll continue to reiterate around the fact that there is a housing order still in place around this, and it's important that people observe that. The vast majority of farmers do. They understand the importance of biosecurity around this, and we'll continue to monitor the situation.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Minister. It's just an important one that my office is getting contacted about today. Minister, there's been a number of areas touched on, but I want to focus on one that is continuing to come to my attention, and I'm sure others around the committee as well, and that's the frustration of farmers who are trying to adapt and transition to meet the environmental standards, the stricter environmental standards and water quality standards. So with that said, what action are you taking to ensure the planning system is not blocking the construction of essential infrastructure which is key to delivering those outcomes, such as slurry storage, silage pits and nutrient management facilities?
Thank you, Daniel. This is a really important issue, so I'm going to separate it. There's one issue in terms of the law and the policy around this, and then the second one is in terms of Northern Ireland Environment Agency as a statutory consultee and how it responds to the planning applications. So in relation to water quality, we all across society need to do more to improve water quality. Lough Neagh is a demonstration of the quality action in regards to that. We also need to deal with air pollution in the form of ammonia. And you know that we consulted in terms of the Nutrients Action Programme last year. There's been a task and finish group set up with an independent chair. It's doing its work and will hopefully come back this spring in terms of recommendations on the way forward in regards to that. And then there will be a further consultation, and I'll bring a paper to the executive. I'll be hopeful around that. One of the key issues, and it's been brought out here by the Deputy Chair, is in terms of how do we ensure a just transition for farming. A sustainable farm investment scheme will be key around that to ensure that I have the funding to support the farming community in adapting to the issues that we have at hand, and particularly in relation to the issues we're seeing just recently in terms of the impacts of climate change, more heavier rainfall, and they wanting to have additional slurry stores which are also covered, which would then reduce the impact in terms of ammonia. So there's that process underway. In regards to ammonia, that is going on alongside that. We need to find a situation where farmers are able to replace farm buildings which do not add to the ammonia pollution in the area, and in another way actually reduce it. We want to find that. We want to incentivise stuff, for example, covered slurry stores, which will then reduce the ammonia pollution in the area, and that engagement is ongoing. I want that to come to a conclusion very soon, because it's really important we provide a way forward in regards to this. In relation to the other issue, which is in relation to Northern Ireland Environment Agency as a statutory consultee, I get the importance of this for many people within this room, but also outside there who are contacting you as MLAs and representatives for them. The Northern Ireland Environment Agency has a planning improvement plan in place. I spent a good part of yesterday afternoon with them out in Lisburn to go through what has been done around this, the actions completed to date, and then the actions that they're seeking to take in the short and then also medium and long term. There's a number of short-term deliverables they're seeking to take between now and June, and they set them out to me. We need to have improved customer service. I get that. We need to be able to give you better updates in regards to queries around this. I have to clear those to you. I feel the pain when I have to approve that, because I know that when you receive it, you're not going to be too happy. More importantly, your constituents not going to be too happy, where we're saying we've received the application, but because of resource constraints, we can't provide you an update. So we need to do that. But alongside that, we just need to find a way that we're turning around these applications quicker. There is a role for district councils in regards to this. So when an application comes in, to make sure that the application is fully complete before it goes to Northern Ireland Environment Agency, so we don't have applications which you would describe as an MOT application, where you bring it to get an MOT to find out what's wrong with it. That takes up time for us to identify that. It takes up the applicant's time in terms of actually getting turnaround in regards to that. That's also about better enabling planning officers at district councils to be able to evaluate the information in front of them, and we've got a role to play so that we can empower people to take that. But I get this, we need to improve, and it's a statutory consultee, and I know that there's a actual team set up in regards to driving this, and it is something that both Katrina and I have got a laser-like focus on this, because we realise you're not happy as a committee, the members in the Assembly aren't happy, but most importantly, many people around Northern Ireland, particularly in our rural communities, aren't happy either.
I appreciate that honesty, Minister, and it is a particular point of frustration, particularly within the farming community, who are trying to comply as best possible with the high standards and the stricter standards that are coming before them. But in order to meet those standards, they do have to adapt, and the problem is the system is then preventing them from adapting, which is then causing the problem. So, Minister, with that said, and you've outlined quite a bit there, but do you accept that the delays in the planning system for farm storage infrastructure is undermining the farmers' ability to comply with the environmental regulations?
So the environmental regulations are law, and there's a requirement to comply with them. And I think it's important as Minister, after taking a pledge of office, upon taking up office, to uphold the rule of law, that I set that out. If you take a step back in terms of what I inherited, and if you read the Office Environmental Protections report in relation to ammonia pollution, the Department was previously acting unlawfully in regards to this. They took legal action against the Department in the absence of ministers. So it was the legal action, and Katrina had to take a decision, which I fully support, to get ourselves on the right side of the law. That means things are much more restrictive in relation to ammonia pollution. A lot of areas in Northern Ireland are saturated with ammonia. We need to find a way to get those emissions down. There's a legal obligation to do that, but also deal with those practical issues on farm, and that's something I'm very, very acutely aware of. Do you want to say anything on this, Katrina? No. Yeah.
These are all kind of connected. I'm not going on to any other area, only this, because it is coming up quite a bit. But just in relation to the applications generally, and I'm hearing it in my constituency, so I think it's quite a wide issue. Have you any details, Minister, as to the scale of applications for agricultural infrastructure, such as slurry tanks or lagoons and livestock housing, that are currently being delayed by the system or have been refused outright, which is really creating a considerable issue for the farmer in terms of environmental compliance?
I wouldn't have those statistics in front of me, and obviously I know I've cleared a lot of written assembly questions in regards to this, but look, I get there's an issue here, but we do need to find a way through this, but we do need to meet our environmental obligations as well, and it's trying to match that together. And that's why fundamentally I need the budget cover in relation to the Sustainable Farm Investment Scheme. And just because I haven't been on the media every day slamming the Finance Minister, because that's not my style, I want to work with people, doesn't mean to say that there's issues here in terms of our budget and us being able to support the farming community around that. We've got to, collectively as an executive, we've got to work through these issues, and we've got to get a budget agreed for the time ahead, because that's really, really important, so we can give certainty to everyone across Northern Ireland.
And just from a reassurance point of view, Minister, what discussions have you had with the relevant people in position of power in terms of planning, etc., policy, to ensure that this process moves on much more swiftly rather than obstruct the environmental transition that is required of farmers? Because the message I'm getting time and time again with great frustration is, we want a transition, but the system is preventing us from being compliant because of all the blockages. So if a business is expanding at rapid rate, which many are in some areas in terms of agriculture, but they're being blocked, then that is having a massive and major detriment to their business and their experience.
Trina can probably reply to this, but she'll also probably verify that I have been consistent in engaging with officials on this, and they know that.
And I think some of the issues for us, NIA and the agency, it's very clear that it cannot continue with the level of performance in responding. It's not the decision maker, as you know, Daniel, but it does provide advice to the decision makers. That advice does have to reflect the law. So in some areas where there is a saturation, for example, it won't be legally enough to just not make it worse. Your proposals have to make it better, and that's challenging. But in answer to your earlier question, we do have, and I think we've had a number of case studies that are being considered by the Task and Finish group, been looking very carefully at the areas where it has been entirely possible for NIA to give positive feedback back to the relevant planning authority. I'm not so sure what happens when it gets back, but I do know that where applications come in and where there is really good evidence that the approach taken reflects the legal position, then they are not, there's not an issue.
I think there's a bit of a slightly, Chair, there's a bit of a contrast in that the planning authorities at Council are telling me that they it's not a matter of making the decision. It's actually getting it back from NEA, it is leading to environmental problems on farms across.
And the performance hasn't been good enough, and I think NIA staff were here just a few weeks ago and admitted that themselves. We can't have this. It just needs to improve. They need not just the resources, which we are working to, we've given the agency the budget cover to have resources, but also it needs the process, not to be overcomplicated. And if it is of any comfort to you, there is a review of communication and stakeholder engagement, so that on the planning portal there will be a much easier way of being able to see where things are, because I know that's been a particular frustration. And like the Minister, you know, when I see some of the letters coming out from NIA, I sort of wince a bit myself, so I understand completely. And we have said that position can't continue. It's not fair to elected representatives.
Minister, you looking in here?
Yeah, so look, I know this is an important issue. I found it very useful yesterday afternoon at NEA in Lisburn to go through this. If it would be useful as an informal committee session, I know some other committees do this, for yourselves to come out to NEA Lisburn for you to take you through these issues, then that's something we were quite willing to facilitate, because it's a critical issue for yourselves. It'd be good for you to be able to go out and see them, and it'd be also to go through some of the policy issues, because I believe in openness and transparency, and also in terms of the scrutiny role that you have, and if you wanted to do that, we could set that up for you.
Something we could potentially look as in the forward work programme. We'll move on to a few more speakers here. Tom.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us this morning. Back to young farmers, it has been mentioned briefly earlier on. How can a young farmer who falls into a piece of land or a farm obtain entitlements? For example, without those entitlements, you'll not be able to compete against the other farm businesses in the area. So, will the department consider making entitlements available for young farmers to purchase?
So I understand the challenges here, and it's not just in relation to entitlements, but also in terms of land values. We've seen those of late. So there's a multiple range of issues here. The schemes that we had in previously didn't change the dial in regards to this, so we need to be very conscious that we're, you know, always doing what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got, and then we need to change this a bit. You know what the European Union's consulting about in terms of generational renewal, which will be the payments in terms of farm sustainability payments in our case, which there would be basic payments, would stop at the age of 65. That's how radical they're looking at this. We're not proposing to go that way, okay, and put that on record, but we do need to find better ways to be able to do this, and the previous schemes didn't change the dial in regards to this. Is there anything you want to say?
No, just, I mean, the entitlement, and for those who are able to trade, obviously, the window is now, the trading window is now open, but if there is more information, I think the pilot will help us articulate what has worked when we do the evaluation and what hasn't. But the Minister is absolutely right. Anything new we need to do needs to be demonstrably able to deliver results and not just be more of the same, because what has happened before hasn't frankly worked.
Yeah, well, of course, the concern is if we can't encourage our young people into the agriculture sector, then it's going to die off. One of your 10 pledges here is you're dealing with the Bovine TB. But by the end of this Assembly term, is all that we can expect to see in relation to this a document with evidence-based solutions to deal with this? Or are we actually going to see something positive on the ground, some action on the ground, rather than just simply another document saying, well, here's an evidence-based solution to dealing with this?
Yeah, so I think I have to first of all acknowledge the importance of this issue, and I had a farm family in with me yesterday, and I understand the mental health toll that this is having upon people in Northern Ireland. And when I came into the office, I understand the challenges around this. We had only a few months before taking up office, we had the outcome in relation to the judicial review in relation to the wildlife intervention which my predecessor had proposed, and I commissioned the Chief Veterinary Officer to do a full review of this, and we got stakeholders to agree a blueprint on the way forward, and I think that is fundamental that we were able to do that and actually have a clear agreement around the room in terms of the actions that we wish to take. We're taking forward the regionalised initiative in the northwest of Northern Ireland and County Donegal. I want to thank the Irish Government for their support in terms of shared island around that. We had many people at that event, including a contributor from New Zealand, which was outlining how that regionalised approach had worked there. Alongside that, we're continuing to roll out the blueprint, people, cattle and wildlife, and there's been additional funding put in place in relation to testing. There's a review of testing regimes, and also then we're going to consult in the time ahead in relation to wildlife interventions. One thing I would say is that if in politics and in life you're not prepared to learn lessons, then you're in the wrong game. And what happened here in relation to my predecessor announcing on the last day of this assembly a wildlife intervention which fell at the first hurdle in relation to judicial review, and the fact that we don't take lessons from that and make sure that any interventions we do are correct and proper, then that would be wrong, because it's important that we do not do something which is actually highly vulnerable to legal challenge. I'm very clear there needs to be primary legislation around this. I could have progressed that if another party hadn't decided to walk out of this place and deny us 2 years of this mandate. So I'm doing all I can, but I'm trying to do it, make sure it's done through proper process and done correctly. I understand the cost of this to the farm families. I understand the cost to my department. I understand the importance of it, but I'm also trying to make sure we do things right.
You talked about the shared island project that you're carrying out. Why did you decide to carry out that project in the area where TB is less prevalent than in other areas? Will that give you an accurate reading, if you like, of what you're looking for?
So we chose that area because of the geographic nature of the area. If people are saying to me that the level of TB in that area is in some way not concerning, and then I'm baffled. There's a very high level of TB in that area and across Northern Ireland. We have nearly 90% of the farmers signed up to do the surveys on their land. I want to thank them for the engagement in regards to that. It's important we progress with this, and we have to move beyond the stage of saying which area we want. There's a pilot there, it's going ahead, we've got support from Shared Island, and I think it's important we progress in regards to it.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's saying it's not important. All we're saying is less prevalent in that area than it is in other areas. And therefore, it's just as important in that area as it is in other areas. But it was just with regards to reading. One further question, Chair, and then I have others, but I'll put those forward in writing. If what happened at AFBI were to happen on somebody's farm, for example, with regards to welfare issues and slurry bins blowing into woodland and that type of stuff, what would the consequences be for that farmer?
So Katrina will outline that.
Yeah, they should be absolutely no different, because the instructions that we have issued is that unannounced inspection by NIA, veterinary service staff out to check animal welfare. We probably did more than would happen in a similar case, and in every case they followed the rules that they would follow in any other case. So determining whether there was a breach in the first place, whether it was low severity, medium severity or high severity, and in line with the enforcement policy, taking the appropriate action. So if I were to say anything, it is probably that there would have been an even more resilient and robust and rigorous standard attached, because I still take the view that if your farm is run in a public sector organisation, you don't just meet minimum, you don't fall over the line, you ought to be better than that.
Okay. I'm sorry, what's the fallout from this? What's the fallout from this right across the farming sector? What are you doing then to build confidence within the farming community, again, that they can now trust the department and the arm's length bodies and so forth?
Well, as a department, we take these allegations seriously. They're fully investigated, and there's proper investigations undertaken without fear or favour in regards to this. I have noted some of the commentary around this, and some of it is inaccurate, and that is concerning around this. But it's important I say to people that we take all allegations seriously, they're investigated and they're followed up in regards to this. And I know that AFBI have been here before in the committee, and I'm sure if you wanted them to come again, they would be happy to attend.
Okay, right, I move around John and then Gareth. John.
Yeah, I have a question on a different topic. Before I go to that, I want to very briefly thank the Minister and the Permanent Secretary for the attention to detail they've shown on the issue that Anya raised around violence against women and girls, and extend that thanks to their wider teams who are involved closely on these issues and who have been affected by loss themselves. I want to make a point in that regard, if I may, that we should always be very mindful that outside the domestic setting there's also a very large risk to women in rural areas because of the isolation of rural roads. This was really brought to focus for me during the COVID period, when a large number of people contacted me to say they felt afraid in what could be seen as their own neighbourhood, because when a car came along and slowed down, they felt threatened immediately. And the lack of street lighting, for example, in local locations, so it's something that should feature in all considerations of rural matters as well. The question on the separate matter of this, it's a seasonal issue. We're coming to the season now when there'll be news stories of materials being burned containing hazardous materials. It's something I had flagged up with my own constituency to me last summer, and one that recurs, as members will know, and I think it's good to get early on these matters. There was a high-level issue, for example, in the South Belfast constituency, and one that was in the news quite a bit, and one not dissimilar in my own, but at a lower level. I'm keen to know from the department if there are any updates on those issues and any plans ahead based on outcomes that have come so far.
Thank you, John. So I'm limited in what I can say around this because there's an environmental crime investigation ongoing in relation to this matter, alongside also litigation. But what I can say is that I'm deeply concerned that despite warning signage having been erected, and also the Northern Ireland Environment Agency urging people to stay away from the Meredy Street site. It appears that people have entered the site, the pallets have been deposited there. Unauthorised access to the site could amount to a criminal offence. Given the ongoing risk to the safety of people accessing the site, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency would again urge members of the public not to access it under any circumstances. I, as Minister today, would urge local elected representatives to provide the leadership needed to ensure that people obey the law and heed the warnings issued to keep people off the site. The Northern Ireland Environment Agency has previously confirmed that a consultant assessing the Meredy Street site had detected the presence of asbestos despite efforts by the landowner to remediate it. Full remediation of places like the site at Meredy Street, where the Sloan Molyneux factory once existed, could take up to 2 years. Whilst the risk from the remaining asbestos is low, if undisturbed, ongoing trespassing at the site will make it extremely difficult for any further remediation work to be conducted. As the site is privately owned, it remains the responsibility of the landowner to fully remove all asbestos material.
Sure, I welcome that response, and I echo the Minister's call for public and political support. I point out that the risks presented in my own area last year were not known until after the event. So people who may have left a window opened in the general vicinity on the occasion may not have done that if they had known in advance there was an issue at the site. But there was no knowledge of this until some weeks after the event, in fact, and it was thanks to the media that we found out, and that's why I'll raise this now, and I'll do so again at a time that isn't too late to do anything, but it's something we need to keep a very close eye on in terms of our quality and environmental impact.
Yeah, I would say, John, is that I am really concerned that, you know, signage has been erected, warnings have been issued, but yet people have accessed the site and deposited pallets on the site. And I think it's really important as Minister, I urge people not to access the site and ask for the support for local representatives to join me in regards to this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And Gareth, last but not least.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. Just, I suppose, referring back to the TB issue, and I suppose generally the spiralling costs of the disease to the industry and to the department, and the rise in incidence levels obviously concern. I'm just wondering from your own perspective as a Minister, with overall responsibility and in terms of your performance. I know, you know, we have the electoral cycle which will give a performance indication for everybody in the House, but in terms of your own performance indication on TB alone, how do you judge that as a Minister in terms and in light of the spiralling costs? Because I do remember, you know, whenever, you know, overall costs were a lot lower than 60 million and in excess of 60 million. I'm just wondering in terms of the work around the eradication and the, you know, the hope or the aspiration to have levels by 2040, are you in your current position on course to achieve that? And if you agree that you are, what are the outworkings of that? Because we do know TB is a really invasive disease in terms of the farmer's mentality, first and foremost, the farmer's welfare, how they see their farm, the animal welfare aspect of it, and also economically to the province in terms of the invasiveness of that disease and its outworkings. I'm just wondering, in terms of you as Minister, in terms of your own performance, how do you view it?
So it's not about me, to be honest. It's about farm families and the impact it's having upon them. And I'm doing all I can, and the officials in my department are working based upon science and evidence and follow due process in regards to this issue. This is something that has been prevalent in Northern Ireland long before I became Minister. I'm very conscious of the previous decision that was announced, which was done on the last day of this Assembly, fell at the first hurdle in relation to judicial review, and then I was left to pick up the pieces in regards to it. And what I'm seeking to do is to take a holistic approach to this in terms of 3 pillars: people, cattle and wildlife. I understand the importance of it. It's something that I see in terms of the impact of farm families. I will take a decision at the end of this consultation period in regards to this, and it will be based upon a proper consultation and the science and evidence that's presented to us in regards to this. But I know the importance of this. I've seen it very regularly. Yesterday, for example, I know we need to get a grip of it. There's a lot of actions being taken. I think that the regionalised initiative in the northwest and Donegal is a really key intervention. I want to thank officials in my department and also Daphne who've been working with us in regards to this. Shared Island Fund, the leadership from the Taoiseach in regards to that, and also the support from the Executive Office in regards to potential transformation funding, which we hope to get through. So we're focused on this. I get it, and I'm going to continue to work through it.
I suppose just, on that front, when you're saying it's not about you, that to me it has an impact across your whole organisation. When you're saying it's not about you,
no, it's about the people it affects, Gareth.
Well, absolutely, but it is also, and they're looking for the leadership that.
And I'm given that.
But I'm just saying, it's not. I don't think it's a useful thing to say it isn't about you, because ultimately, in terms of the outworking of any programme or outworking of targets that have to be met to meet the have level by 2040, it is ultimately about you.
No, it's all together. We all have to do this together.
No, I understand that, but
we have to do it together.
I understand that, but in terms of, I just don't like always to hear when people in a senior position say it isn't about me.
No, and I'm here.
I realise it's about everyone, but I think it is in terms of the department, and you lead it. And we've seen in the AFBI, you'll not, have you said today it is about you in terms of improving AFBI's outlook on what has went before in terms of the videos and what that evidence has pointed to. I think it should be about you overall responsible position in terms of improving that picture, because farmers do go through the mill. When those inspectors come up the drive, it isn't a picnic. They're really, really stressed out about that type of thing.
I totally get that.
Yeah, so that's my point. I would rather you say it's about the entire outworkings and performance of the department to drive change and to make the necessary, make the landscape suitable to see these incidence levels driven down.
And that's what the department's seeking to do, but we've got to do it collectively together. We can't just do it alone. It's not about one individual that can achieve all of this. I'll provide the leadership, I'll come here and provide the scrutiny. I go to the Assembly, I'll be there on Monday in terms of question time. I understand the responsibilities as being Minister. I'm up for that, and I'm continuing to do that. But dealing with TB, we know requires a collective approach to address this. In relation to the issues that have been raised, these have been discussed previously in this committee. The committee has corresponded with us in regards to it all. I've outlined our response to that. The AFBI have been here, you've been able to ask questions. You understand AFBI is an arm's length body for my department. We're the sponsor department. We hold that role very understanding of the responsibilities around that, and we will continue to engage with them on this. But when allegations are received, they're investigated and they're followed up.
Yeah, and just suppose.
Can I raise a point of order?
Yeah, point of order, yes, John.
Is it an order? And I have no experience of this at committee, because never before at committee have I been in a position where I've heard the same questions being asked in repetition. And ultimately getting the same answers. But this time, I'll admit, with a slightly different slant, and the point of order isn't based on the repetitional address. That was Clark and the Chair after the meeting. It really isn't a good use of time to repeat the same question over and over again. Separate to that, on an issue of accuracy, is it permissible for misrepresentation to take place through a line of questioning indicating that a minister should have a performance appraisal on an outcome on one issue conducted at a committee meeting with no information given at all to highlight that the same issue existed, was prevalent, was raised repeatedly at this committee prior to the current minister taking up post? In the last mandate, this committee had the same conversations on bovine TB and compensation payments, so it's inaccurate and unrepresentative to reflect the responsibility of this minister alone, and not in the interest of this committee to do that.
So, John, you say as a point of order, this is maybe something we'll get the clerk to go and check out and come back to us on. Is that
unrepresentative?
Okay.
Another question.
And inaccurate.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Gareth. Yes. Well.
Yeah. Thanks. I don't get where you're coming from, John.
Happened before. I'll put it more
straightforwardly. But I mean, the minister himself has referred to a previous minister who's not in post.
It was here in the last term, and the one before, and the compensation through the roof.
I mean, it's a simple aspirational question to go, how do you think you've performed on an issue? We're asked that all the time. We go around the doors every, quite a few times in our lifetimes if we're committed to this job, and that happens. You're asked on the doorstep, how do you think you've performed? I'm sure the minister's been asked himself on many occasions from that point. But anyway, I digress. In terms, Minister, we had a short back and forth in the chamber about the wastewater. I'm particularly interested in the septic tank issue. Yeah. I think it's something that I think needs a greater degree of thought. And from someone who has one of the newer style biotanks that is run off electricity, there's an issue when there isn't a supply of electricity to those tanks. I'm just wondering, in terms of what the outworkings of your ultimate aim with that regulation will be. Will it mitigate? Will it contain clauses or outcomes that could assist homeowners in the event of power cuts, all that type of thing, where it could be demonstrated that they have not willingly in any way caused any issue, or manufacturers there's been a delay in responding to some type of technical fault because they're not like a normal, historical style septic tank that you would find in rural areas, which I assume is what you're trying to address going forward. And you have said it won't apply retrospectively in the chamber, but I'm just wondering, in terms of those new style systems, they're not, what part of that legislation will address, potential issues that may arise from them, because they're not, there isn't a completely fail-safe solution, I don't think, out there at the minute on the market.
So Northern Ireland Environment Agency have an enforcement policy, and that's what they would follow in regards to this. I'm sure we could share it with the committee if you wanted that. The environmental law sits as it does in regards to that, and the legislation we're seeking to bring forward is the Fisheries and Water Environment Bill. I did outline in the Chamber and outline it again today. We've got a public awareness raising campaign we're planning in the spring in terms of how to better manage your septic tank. You've set your what you've got. Some people have got older ones or perhaps not fully acquainted with how to manage it, so I want to raise awareness in regards to that. That's always the best step, is to raise that awareness, that education, that sanctification focus, rather than the regulation and enforcement, because that's where we've failed in regards to that. But we do need to have an ability to be able to respond to low severity water pollution incidents. The statistics are quite high in terms of the amount of incidents like that which have been verified, and then part of the legislation would allow us to issue fixed penalty notices. But that's something we want to go as a last stop in regards to that. We want to make sure that we're not doing that, because that's at the first instance, because we want to make sure that people aren't doing the pollution in the first case. So that's the whole focus around this. In terms of the management of septic tanks and stuff like that, that's probably there's a wider issue that we're responsible for regulation and enforcement, and then there's another issue in terms of where that sits around that. But I do get your point around this, and hopefully we can raise people's awareness. But it has been raised with me with a lot of people saying that how can we better ensure that we're addressing the issue around septic tanks. I would say to you as well, Gareth, that I understand the importance of that issue. There's a wider issue in terms of there's larger wastewater plants. They're sitting all around Northern Ireland. There's one in my constituency that is regularly pumping raw sewage and wastewater into the loch, and that's where the focus has to be in terms of the impact that that's having around this, because there's also an issue in terms of resourcing for us as a department.
I suppose briefly, that's my point in terms of the sledgehammer to crack the nut, if you want to use that analogy, in terms of the bigger polluters, if you like. But I'm an advocate of them new systems. The overflow or the water that comes out of them is very, very clear. It is, and it's exemplary in terms of where I suppose we want to get to. But it's just it's mitigating those technical issues that people might experience, the like of a power cut. Something that's beyond their own physical control.
Right. Thank you, Gareth. And Minister and Katrina, well, thank you very much. This was a marathon session, and I've been on the committee for right well, and I have to say it's one of the longest sessions. And that's not a complaint, by the way. It's one of the longest sessions we've had with the Minister, and we really thank you for your indulgence and taking the time to give a very detailed presentation, take a wide range of answers, questions, and give detailed answers to them as well. So, well, thank you very much for taking the time out to come here today. We do appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you. Folks, can I ask this here now? I'm asking, would it be okay if we jumped till item number 9 and then just come back to the dilapidation bill, and we'll finish off with the dilapidation bill, because there'll be a private session connected to that too, okay? So we're just going to jump till item 9, right? So it's the Climate Change Just Transition Commission Regulations NI 26 Citizen Space Responses. The Department submitted the above SL1 and draft statutory rule to committee on the 5th of February to advise of the intention to make new regulations which will establish an advisory non-departmental public body to be known as a Just Transition Commission. At the meeting on the 12th of February, the committee agreed to publish the Department's papers, issue a call for views using the Citizen Space platform, and publicise a call for views on the committee's social media. The committee also agreed to receive no briefing from DAERA officials on the 12th of March. Our Citizen Space survey closed on the 26th of February with a total of 8 responses submitted. An additional written submission was also received. Of the respondents, 5 indicate they were content with the SR. 4 respondents raised concerns relating to accuracy, completeness, or potential unintended consequences. All responses have been included in the pack on pages 597 to 610. Okay. Do you want to read that? Okay.
That's the people who responded.
No. Okay. Okay, a briefing on the proposed SR will be provided by DAERA on the 12th of March, when the committee will be required to make a formal decision on the SR. At this stage, and based on the response received, the committee can seek a further information, or we can content to consider the proposal at the meeting on the 12th of March 2026. Number 10 is there's a correspondence as item 10, memo for reference at page 612 of the pack. And if there are any further items that members wish to discuss, please advise me now. Otherwise, I'm seeking agreement that the action proposed in the memo for their remaining items are agreed. Okay. 10.2 members, page 64. You doing this one, Janice? No?
Yeah, you can.
Page 614, the pack to correspondence from the department dated regarding the laying of revised statement of principles for the creation of a network of marine maintenance practice area. Copy of statement starts at page 616 of the pack. These are just for information, aren't they?
Sorry?
These are
just read this out.
Okay, so 10.3 members, page 626 of the pack. Clerk's memo dated this 26th of February from the Clerk of the Committee of Finance regarding the 25-26 public expenditure outturn and forecast outturn January R10 position. Members, okay to note this? Refer to page 670 of the pack as number 10.4 of the pack to correspondence date the 18th of February from an individual regarding the supply of veterinary medicines that has been forwarded to the Windsor Framework DSC. The correspondence proposes that it would be helpful to both pet owners and other animal owners to have a list of published by DAERA of pharmacies and retailers both in the north and the south that are willing to fulfil veterinary prescriptions. Members, are you okay for us to write to the department to query this if possible? Is that okay? Item number 10.5, page 672 of the pack. Oh, sorry, don't need that there. No. Okay. So I'm going to 10.8. I refer you to the 10.8, the pack starting at page 682, to a report from the NI Fiscal Council assessing the Finance Minister's proposed 26-27 to 28-29 30 budget. Members, okay to note?
Yep.
Okay. And addendum 10 is forward work programme, right? I refer you to the draft forward work programme starting at page 57 table of papers. Is that okay if it be published? It was suggested earlier maybe a trip to NIA. Is that something that we could maybe consider as a forward work programme visit? Okay, members, we're going to jump right back now.
Just quickly in terms of the forward work programme. Sorry, I know we have at a fair briefing on Thursday the 19th on the Wildfires Action Plan, and that'll be an oral briefing, and then SL oral briefing as well. But are we in closed session? Yeah. No. Well, look, in terms of the dilapidation bill and the ongoing clause by clause nature of that, I suppose we're hitting, what time's 1:15 now at the minute. I know Daniel's PSE on Thursdays, Aoife's heading to Justice now at 2 o'clock. If we could maybe try to rejig some of the work for programme just to prioritise the bill and give it the time that it needs.
Yeah, Chair, sorry, I just had emailed my team to say we'll start with the bill next week.
Yeah,
yes.
that'd be brilliant, Janice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go as far as we can now with the bill, sure. Okay. Item 8, Dilapidation Bill Deliberations, informal decision making. That's clause by clause. Today we're still in deliberations, but a new phase where we will start to move towards making some informal decisions on our agreement or otherwise with each clause. And if we wish to propose any amendments, I'll be requesting that we move into closed session for those discussions. Firstly, the DAERA Bill Office officials Simon and Mark are going to brief us on the outcome of the 2 meetings they held with NILGA and the Belfast City Council. Members, you have been provided with papers for this item, and table papers we have the deliberations table updated after last week's meeting, starts at page 25, and a combined note of the informal meetings with NILGA BCNI, which starts at page 50. Okay.
Don't need to do that.
Okay. So, Simon and Mark, would you like to commence your deliberations?
Yep, thank you, Deputy Chair. So, as you've already mentioned there, we met with representatives of NILGA, Building Control NI and Environmental Health Officers on the 24th of February and the 2nd of March to discuss the local government issues relating to the dilapidation bill. The purpose of that meeting was to listen to their views, to enable us to report back to the committee, to aid your further scrutiny of the bill and ultimately the completion of your report. As expected, the vast majority of the issues were those which committee had already raised with us during the ongoing deliberation sessions. And I'll now move into the issue, into each specific issue in some detail. The first matter that arose was some confusion around timing. Local government's understanding of the committee's call for evidence, which of course issued on Citizen Space last year. The local government perceived this as the start of a sort of typical departmental public consultation, which would usually take place on policy or legislation at a much earlier stage in the process. And as a result, their expectations were raised around the scale and extent of the changes that could potentially be made to the draft legislation at this point in time. We advised that significant changes outside of the agreed policy position would require a significant step back in the process and, of course, executive approval, which would probably prevent the bill from completing Assembly passage in the remainder of this mandate. The Assistant Committee Clerk was also at the meeting in an observer capacity and very helpfully was able to set out the process whereby everything that NILGA and SOLAS had input to the call for evidence was analysed and distilled into the Chairman's brief, which was used to put questions, of course, to myself and Mark at previous deliberation sessions. We also advised that the Department had separately issued the draft guidance for comment in September 2025 to SOLAS and in early October to NILGA, but we had not received a response until the start of the Christmas leave period. On the issue of the second issue of resourcing, this is the main issue which underpins most of the other issues which local government were raising at our discussions. And whilst they did not disagree with the aspirations of the bill, they stated that as it stands, the bill will be a burden to councils and they feel it will not be deliverable as a result. We explained the current position around resourcing and that no discrete funding will be provided by way of the bill. The bill does, of course, include cost recovery provisions such as a charge on land or the ability around the power of sale to sell a property, and other means of raising some revenue such as charging fees, the fixed penalty notice in relation to low-level dilapidation and the sale of materials from a site. and representatives confirmed that they will be raising this issue again with NILGA and SOLAS. The third issue was around terminology. The issue here is the use of phrases which the committee will be familiar with, such as amenity, detrimental and seriously detrimental. Councils would prefer these terms to be tightly defined and included on the face of the bill itself. However, these are subjective terms, and the statutory guidance makes it clear that each case will be different depending on where the property is located, the level of detriment, etc. The terms are not defined in Britain, and to do so in the bill would not be feasible, as there needs to be a level of flexibility, and councils will need to take each case on its own merits. Councils have a preference to tie down definitions, terminology and indeed standards in the bill, as they believe this would give them more cover and reduce the likelihood of a legal challenge. However, it was highlighted that the statutory guidance will indeed be statutory and relied upon in court along with the legislation itself in any cases. The next issue is around the potential production of a matrix. The issue of the matrix was brought up. It's currently used by Belfast City Council in enforcement cases, and officials agreed that the department could consider an adapted version from local government for inclusion in the statutory guidance, which of course the bill itself references. This matrix could help alleviate local government concerns over the terminology and the potential volume of low-level dilapidation cases, as well as aiding consistency. Any matrix would need to be agreed by all 11 councils, and as such, NILGA would need to coordinate its production before presenting a draft to the department. The next issue is around maintenance notices, and of course this is the main new discretionary power available to councils in the bill. This provides the councils with powers to tackle low-level dilapidation by way of maintenance notices, and councils requested these powers to bring them into line with local government in Britain. Anecdotal evidence would suggest that the powers work well in Britain. However, representatives see them as burdensome and predict that they will lead to councils being involved as a referee in civil disputes between neighbours, and very minor disputes between neighbours, and that they cited high hedges legislation as an example of this. However, maintenance notices are discretionary and are not intended to tackle very minor issues, such as, for example, a neighbour's grass not having been cut for a couple of weeks. And we shall be strengthening the statutory guidance to make this clear. Representatives did raise the possibility of charging complainants an administrative fee for the issuing of a maintenance notice as a way of reducing the volume of potentially spurious complaints. However, this is not the case in Britain and would represent a shift in the current policy, requiring the dilapidation policy to be brought back to the executive. In this scenario, it is highly unlikely, as I mentioned, that the bill could complete its assembly passage. Representatives want provision to complain to a court, as is the case for other types of notices in the bill, with the court able to order a person to comply with the notice. However, as maintenance notices deal with low-level dilapidation, it is not felt that obtaining court orders would be proportionate, and there are no court orders for the equivalent Section 215 powers in Britain. The next issue relates to unknown owners. The bill, of course, is trying to tackle this issue by giving councils stronger and clearer cost recovery powers. As I mentioned, those would be things like charges on land and the power of sale through the 1881 Conveyancing Act. We are seeking a definitive legal view on specific clauses as currently drafted as to whether works can be carried out in default even if the owner is unknown but a notice has been breached. This was the intention of the instruction to council, and Belfast City Council currently has this power or an equivalent power under Section 76 of the 1911 Belfast Corporation Act. Representatives pointed out that they would be last in the queue when it comes to recovering costs for works in default by way of a charge on a property. However, it is not within the department's powers to alter the priority of charges on properties, with pre-existing charges taking precedence. Councils may choose to take this, of course, into account when determining if they should carry out works in default on a property. Moving on to the issue of cost recovery, this is not just confined to circumstances where the owner is unknown, and the stronger powers in relation to charges on land and the power of sale were again highlighted. Representatives highlighted the fact that in some cases the charges on land and ultimately selling the property may not be sufficient to recoup their full costs. However, they were not in a position to identify alternative approaches to recouping costs that would fall within the department's remit. The issue of new vesting powers were suggested in this regard, but it was pointed out that DAERA does not have power in this area, and councils already have access to vesting powers in other legislation with DFC. Representatives wanted more clarity on what would be deemed reasonable costs, and we previously advised committee that councils would already be determining reasonable costs when applying other legislation. Ultimately, what is deemed reasonable will of course be tested in the courts. However, this will be included in the queries which we will be addressing with our legal advisors, and it is something which can be drawn out in the statutory guidance. The issue of the fixed penalty was raised, and it was felt that the amount currently proposed at £500 is insufficient, and it was pointed out that the fixed penalty is only to be used in low-level dilapidation cases and is a potential income source for councils. The penalty is offered as an opportunity to discharge liability for prosecution, but the key point is that remedial work still needs to be completed regardless. As such, retaining the fixed penalty provision would reduce the administrative burden as well on the courts, and we confirmed that the amount could be raised to £750 or £1,000 if committee felt that was appropriate. Just turning to the last few issues here, heritage sites were discussed, and the issues around balancing public safety and preserving built heritage. We advised that this was the intention behind clause 17, whereby when issuing notices, councils must consult the relevant council officers who deal with heritage buildings, or indeed DFC in the case of historic monuments. And they alluded to current high-profile cases which members will be familiar with, such as the Antrim Arms Hotel in Ballycastle. On the matter of emergency action, a concern was highlighted in the use of these powers under clause 10. The representatives felt that the provision whereby costs would not be recoverable if a court finds that the power action was not justified would be a major obstacle in using the power at all. Finally, demarcation of roles. The representatives at the meeting wanted to include further references in the bill itself to the role of other departments and bodies, such as Department for Infrastructure, PSNI and the Housing Executive, particularly in relation to the demarcation of each organisation's roles. However, we cannot mandate other bodies in DAERA legislation, and as we already mentioned, the PSNI and the statutory guidance, we could do likewise for the other bodies as appropriate. And finally, just some specific legal queries will be sent to our legal advisors to provide legal clarity, so that we can advise committee and the representatives at the meeting in due course. That's the full summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon and Mark, for that presentation today. Do members have any questions? I think we're going to go to deliberations next week, right? We'll move into deliberations next week because it's very, very, very soon. So basically, I want to thank you then for the presentation today. Okay.
Thank you very much.
And we'll move to close session now. That's right.
No, we'll not be doing that at all.
Not
If
that
I
at
just
all.
go back to any other business.
Yeah. Okay, folks. Do members have any other business? Okay, folks, we'll meet next week then here at the same time, 10 o'clock, room 21. Thank you.
Also Monday.
Oh, sorry, I should have said there as well. We have the additional meeting on Monday, and it is at 1.
No.
No,
Moved on, 10 o'clock.
Where is it?
11 a.m. is it?
Sorry, Monday at 10 o'clock in room 30.
11.
Monday at 11 o'clock
yeah.
in room 30, okay?
Yeah.
Room 30, hold on now, right.
Room 30 at 11 o'clock.
Okay, so we're adjourned.
And we're adjourned.